Recording in progress.
I would like to call to order the adjourned regular meeting notice for today. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Cho,
Present.
Councilmember Lowe,
Present.
Councilmember Talt,
Present.
Vice Mayor Shepherd Rami, Mayor Wong.
Here. The agenda is posted 72 hours prior to each meeting at the following locations: City Hall, the Crow Public Library, and the Stoneman Building. The agenda is also posted on the city's website. The city welcomes public input at this time. The public may address the city council on items that are not on the agenda. Pursuant to state law, the city council may not discuss or take action on issues not on the meeting agenda. To ensure that everyone, including those joining us remotely, are able to hear all speakers clearly, please speak directly into a microphone. Please note that all comments are limited to 3 minutes and will be timed by city staff. I would now like to ask City Clerk Walker to explain how public comment will work.
Thank you. For each item on the agenda, there will be time for public comment. We accept comments in 3 ways. First, we will take in-person comments for each item. Please fill out a speaker card and turn it in to me if you wish to speak on an item. There is a countdown timer displayed on the projector screen to help speakers keep track of the remaining time to speak. We will then accept comments from our Zoom participants. To give a public comment via Zoom, please utilize the chat box. When using this method, name yourself so that your first and last name are reflected for the record. If the comment is regarding a specific agenda item, please indicate which item. Comments will be accepted only until the end of the public comment period for that item. Please keep in mind that if there are technical difficulties with Zoom, the meeting will proceed as normal. The city will do its best to resolve any technical issues as quickly as possible. I will then state the amount of public comments we have received by email for a particular agenda item. Due to technical limitations associated with gathering, printing, and sorting emailed public comment, the city has instituted a 3 p.m. cutoff the day before Friday's city council meeting for emailed public comments. This is to ensure there is sufficient time to gather and provide the emailed comments to the city council. Any comments received after the 3 p.m. deadline will be included in the public comment record, but will not be provided to city council during the meeting.
Does anyone here wish to speak at this time? If so, please state your name and address for the record. Yes, Mr. John Chow.
Morning, Mr. Mayor and members of the City
Morning.
Council. I'd like to get this meeting off to a good start by first thanking the city staff, Philippe Iskandar and Isidro Figueroa, for hosting the housing element discussion this past week. I thought it was a very good input from the community as far as what they would like to see as part of that plan. And I think that gives a lot of guidance to the city council as far as what the city will or will not be agreeable to. So thank you again very much for that, and hope to continue to stay in communication and hear the latest information.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Seeing none, any remotely?
No requests remotely.
Okay, first item, presentation of proposed operating budget by departments. Can we please have an introduction from City Manager Iskandar?
Good morning, Mr. Mayor and council members. Happy Friday to all of you. Yes, so I would like to introduce our operating budget presentation for the fiscal year 2024-2025. As you know, this meeting this morning is the culmination of a series of meetings, public outreach efforts, and community meetings that we've had leading up to today that really started in earnest back in November, December of last year. With that, I want to start off by thanking yourself, Mayor, and the council for your leadership and your guidance throughout this process. All of you have spent hours and hours pouring through our reports, asking questions, meeting with different department heads and myself to get us to this point. Your leadership, coupled with the guidance of our city treasurer, Miss Annie Hahn, and all the work that all of our staff have done to get us to this point really shows in this budget presentation. Every single staff member, almost every single staff member on staff has had a hand in this budget. Every single department, all the way through and through. With that, for the past several years, you've seen us and in our budget books and in our presentations allude to and prepare the council for the reality that we're facing today, a budget where revenues are not keeping pace with expenditures. However, a city our size is very well positioned to deal with that in this coming year. Later in the presentation, you'll see a longer term roadmap on how we are proposing to start to address our revenue shortfalls. But the budget we present to you is a balanced budget because of the past practices we've taken here in San Marino, the reserves that we have, and the restricted funds that we're able to use to keep us whole. Beyond that, we will be covering, see if this works. If you could click on it just one time, Mr. Bowman. There it is. Thank you. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Terry Scher, Interim Finance Director, who's going to give us an overview of last year's year end, as well as what we're starting with in our proposed budget for the next few slides. And then from there, we will go into the individual departments. Directors will be presenting their individual departments with opportunities for questions and comments from the council. And at which point we will then move to public comment following that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Shea.
Your Honorable Mayor, Member City Council, City Manager, kind of stole some of my thank yous, but he's 100% right. I want to really thank the department heads and their staff for keeping us on track, providing timely, accurate information. And I personally want to thank Mark Siegfried, the accounting manager, controller, knowledgeable. The work he does is accurate, and he ties this all together in a report. And so I personally want to thank him. So what we're going to go over is the general fund group. So revenues are for the fiscal year in 23-24 projected to be $35,224,000, expenditures of $31,511,000, net transfers out, CIP, debt service, and capital equipment of $2,730,000 for an estimated net change in fund balance of $983,054. Fiscal year 24-25 proposed budget summary, the general fund group again, which is revenues of $34,878,313, which is 1% down from the year over year. And we'll get into that big change in a minute. Expenditures at $36,283,000, which is a 15% increase, which each department head will go over their big changes when we get to that point. Net transfers in and out of 18 million for a net change in fund or reserves of 1,386,020. So general fund group, the amended budget is 36,108,000. Proposed budget is 34,878,000. A change of a decrease of 1,320,000 or 3.6%. The main reason for this decrease is the prior year we used 1.5 million in ARPA funding, and this year it's only 300,000. Sorry. So we used a conservative growth factor of 4% for property taxes. Year over year, right now we're at 4.1% from the prior year. Our consultants, HDL, they're projecting a 3.88 increase. So we're kind of right in the middle at 4%. And we feel positive with that number is an accurate number. So you can see how important property taxes are to the city. It's 52%. And then the property tax in lieu VLF is 5%, and then the public safety parcel tax is 9%, which shows how important that public safety parcel tax is to the city. So the ad valorem property taxes and the property tax in lieu of VLF are both subject to the assessed value of city properties. All other revenues are slightly up from the prior year, with utility users being slightly up from the prior year as well. So this schedule here is budget to budget. And so, as we said last year, we used a 5.5% increase for property taxes, but we're right at 4.1 now. So that 0.4% change is between the 2-year budgets, not the actual. Property tax in lieu VLF, a 4.2% increase. Public safety parcel tax, which council had indicated they wanted to keep it at 0% growth this year. Charges for services, 0.3% increase. Utility users taxes down a little. Some of the bigger ones, like the gas company and the electric, have been going down since the height of COVID. All others, about a 24% decrease, and the majority of that is the ARPA funds, the 1.5 million. So this graph shows where the bulk of our revenues come from. And the highest obvious is the property taxes, and included in that property taxes is the property tax in lieu VLF. Sales tax, small part. UUT is probably our second largest revenue source. Building permits, plan check fees, and charges for services. And all of those have gone up this year. So here's our proposed expenditures. So you can see our personnel is growing at a 4% increase, which is a modest growth compared to inflation. The unfunded accrued liability is part of our PERS contract. And so this year, in accordance with best practices, we broke out the unfunded portion and moved it to the non-departmental and took it out of personnel, because it's basically a debt service for the past 30 years in PERS. Service and supplies, a 9.7% increase. A lot of that is where inflation has finally caught up to the city. If you remember last year, we had a very high inflation rate, and a lot of our contracts have inflation clauses in them, and they've kind of rolled forward. Each department head can go over their largest changes. Debt service, no debt service this year. We paid off the PERS bonds. And so proposed expenditures of 36,630,000 as opposed to the 34,436,000, which is 2,193,000 increase. And then this just shows the personnel and how much we rely on our personnel, and it's probably our most valuable asset. And it's something that we need to encourage to stay and to grow and keep pace with other cities around us. I've been doing this for 42 years, and I see cities that get in trouble. They turn over city managers and their department heads every other year. And so you need growth and stability, and you need people to stay. And then this is, you can see expenditures going up. So that fiscal year 21-22, you see the large jump in personnel. That was the MOU at that point, which included a 7% raise. And then the increase in the 24-25 year is the MOU that's going to come to city council at the meeting, at the budget adoption meeting, which has a 4% increase in personnel. And then service and supplies this year, again, is going up mainly because of inflation. And we also have so here's some of the reasons why our costs are higher there. And so part of the reason why we have a projected in the general fund expenditures over revenues, our unfunded pension liability for the miscellaneous employees went up 137,000. The unfunded pension liability for police went up 214,000, and the unfunded pension liability for fire went up 197,000. They're also projected to go up, not quite as high as 548, but they are going up next year, I think overall around $400,000. And they keep growing for another couple of years when they finally start to go back down. So I think we're on a 22-year cycle to pay these off. So. And then here's our 5-year forecast. You can see for fiscal year 23-24, our general fund General fund balance reserves as a percentage of general fund is 48.8. And the council has instituted a policy where we wanted to keep at least 40%. So even with fiscal year 24-25, with the projected deficit of 1,364,000, we're still over that 40%. So we're at 45.2%. The problem is in 25-26 is when the parcel tax drops off. And so that's not included in those numbers. And that's why fund balance drops to 32.7, 15.8, and then 1.7, which then again stresses the importance of the parcel safety tax for this city, especially to continue to provide the level of service that the police and fire provide. Here's the big variations from 23-24 to 24-25. Last year, we used 1.9 million of ARPA, this year 401, so a decrease in revenues of 1,536,000. Our cost for workers' compensation is going up 57,000. Our general liability expense is up 210,000. And then again, the unfunded increases. So a net change of 2,351,000 to the negative. So you want to do this one? Okay.
I'll cover this one just because I don't think it's fair for to make Terry do this since he's the interim, and really no pun intended, but the buck stops with me as your city manager. Moving forward on this slide, what you'll see is, as Terry covered, there is a little bit of a shortfall that we have that we want to cover. We can fill that in several different ways, using unassigned fund balances, which is really cash reserves, or what we're proposing here in this report, as you saw in the staff report, bullet number 1 in the short term is selling excess Metro Prop A funds. So we have Metro Prop A funds that we have been unable to program over the past several years and utilize. So one potential option is selling those monies to another agency. And when I say selling those monies, what you do is you basically trade that to another agency for unrestricted funds. They pay us typically 75 cents on the dollar for money that we can't use. And if we can't use it, it is really a use it or lose it dollar. We end up giving it back to Metro. So if we're unable to program that money, the next best option for us is try and trade it for the best return on our investment that we can get for someone else's money. The next option here, the COPS money that we receive from the state, we're looking to program additional money out of our COPS funds balances to help the operations in the police department. And the combination of those two options, again, the short-term options that you see on those two first bullet points, would allow us to not have to dip into our unassigned fund balances terribly. So we can continue to build that by doing this as an alternative. Next, what you're going to see here as I go through this, we have short-term options, mid-term options, and long-term. Short-term are things that we're going to look to implement immediately over the course of the next few months. Mid-term options are things that we're going to implement over the course of the next 6 to 12 months. And long-term options are things that we're going to look at for the next several years. And these are all proposals. These are things that we have been working on as staff to bring before the council, and we'll bring them before you for ultimate policy direction, but they're ideas and, as I said, proposals for the council to consider so that the council and the public know that while we're faced with a small issue this year, we have a way to move forward. We have a way to move out of this. And it is not, for a city our size, this is not an insurmountable challenge. It's something that cities face regularly, but coming out of COVID, where the past several years, this city used one-time money, ARPA, to really bridge that gap. We haven't really planned for structural revenue issues. We now have to plan for structural revenue issues. Next, what you'll see on that bullet point, the fourth bullet point down, is renewal of the public safety tax. Mr. Shea stressed the importance of the public safety tax. That is $3.5+ million that we would have to, as you saw, if we had to backfill that out of our unassigned fund balances within 3 years, we would be at a zero balance in that account. So it really stresses the importance of the level of service that our public safety partners, our teammates, our police officers, our firefighters deliver. You saw them doing it yesterday. Both police, fire, and public works were out 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning putting out a house fire. They then turned around at 6 o'clock at night. They held a community meeting and taught people CPR. There was not a single beat skipped. Not a lick of sleep yesterday, but that is what your public safety parcel tax dollars get you. Next on this, the last bullet point on the short term, we recognize that overtime expenses are a serious issue for us. And so we are looking at that. We are aware that it's a major issue, and we're looking at different things that we can do to address that, whether it be working more closely with our associations, working with our healthcare providers to teach people better practices, to adjust staffing levels, do what we need to do to make sure that we drive that number down. Midterm. The midterm options here, we're going to be conducting a fee study that the city council put as part of the priority initiative so that we can make sure that we are recovering the actual costs of service so that we're not subsidizing things that the council may not necessarily want to subsidize, individual private goods versus things that are community services, like services that our community services department delivers. Inequities in potential inequities in payments for city services. So we are looking at different ways to make sure that all of our property owners, all of our taxpayers pay their fair share for city services, that there aren't imbalances between one property paying one thing and the other one not. And so we're going to be looking at that over the next couple months and how we can try and balance that out to make sure that folks that are receiving services pay their fair share for those services, whether it's our fire services, our police services. These are world-class services. We just want to make sure that those costs are not subsidized by one resident for the other. And the last bullet point on the midterm, and this is something we do continuously, is identifying operational efficiencies to reduce costs. So we always have to look within. We have to look to see what we can do better, what we can do more efficiently, more cost effectively, more streamlined. And the council is supporting that this year by looking at certain priority initiatives that we hope will deliver savings over the long term. So as we look at transitioning our ownership of our fleet to a leasing model, as we look at instituting an asset management program to help reduce our liability costs, to help us better program our capital expenditures, we always have to look within to make sure that we are not just doing things just the way that we've done them forever, when there's better or more efficient or more technology that can be improved to help save this community money. Longer term, this is, again, some mission critical things because these are large dollar amounts. Renewal of the utility users tax that is set to sunset in a few years. That is something that we will come back before the city council for consideration. That makes up a few $1 million, I believe it was about $2 million this last year of our operating budget. So just as the public safety parcel tax, the utility users tax brings in very important structural revenue for us to deliver services. So we'll be before the city council to consider that. And then looking at alternative funding mechanisms for long-term capital. We have very serious long-term capital needs that the council's been addressing and paying for from past surpluses and past reserves, be it our lift stations, be it our sewer systems, be it our culverts, our streets, you name it. We will have to look internally to try and understand how we're funding these things over the long term, because these significant one-time expenditures, which are in the millions, if not tens of millions of dollars, far and away exceed our cash reserves and our ability to pay today. As you saw, we presented this during our town hall budget meeting. We have 40 plus million, well, I believe about 30 plus $1 million worth of ongoing annual capital, just annual capital, streets, sewers, tree replacements, curb and gutter work over the course of the next 5 years. So we'll have to look at a way to structurally fund that if we want to maintain the high level of services that San Marino's used to. And the last bullet point here is you'll see a greater retention of sales tax dollars. There are different measures in different parts of the county that the county is looking at taking sales tax dollars. As you know, we collect less sales tax in San Marino on a percentage basis than most other cities around us. And so we'll want to look at that to see if there's a way that we can keep the money that our residents spend here in town, keep it here in town and not send it to other places of the county or other parts of California. So that's something we're going to look at to make sure that we keep your money here in San Marino. So this is what we're calling a roadmap. It is a combination of things. It is not just one of these things, but these are several things that we need to do. There are options for the council to look at in the coming months for us to try and make sure that we keep the ship from veering too far off course. With that, as this was a little heavy slide, but as we've gone through the first portion of this, I'm going to pause here and see if there are questions from the council before we dive into the priority initiatives and the individual departmental reports.
Questions? Yes, please, Councilmember Lowe.
you, Director, and our city manager. And I just have a quick question about our revenue. Since property taxes, of course, our major part of city revenue accounts for maybe over 60%. And for the real estate market today, even though real estate price has gone up, but inventory dropped dramatically, throughout the board. I'm just wondering, are there any forecasts in a trend, how that's gonna go in the next few years, especially Fed is not lowering the interest rate yet, and it probably will continue this way for a while. So do we have any forecast seeing how our property tax revenue will increase, decrease, or remain the same in the next few years or so?
Thank you, Councilmember Lowe. Councilmember Lowe is asking if we have a forecast maybe from HDL about what the next few years would look like.
We do have a 5-year forecast from HDL, and I think it's anywhere, I think it was 3.88 this year, and then I think it drops a little the next 2 years and then goes back up. But we can provide that forecast. So
to layer on top of that, why you see that number, because the property taxes are such a structural component of ours. What year over year, historically, we saw about 5 to 6%. HDL, who does this up and down the coast throughout the country, really, they work with the county. They work with very granular data to make sure that they make these projections. I mean, they are really involved in the weeds on this. And so we don't have the expertise. We lean on them. Last year, there were projections in the lower 4s, and we decided as a city to project about 5.5% growth. We didn't hit that number. We did not. Had we hit 5.5% on property tax growth, this number, the revenue issue would not exist. What we've decided to do this year some leaderships might say, you know what, project a little bit higher growth because we have larger properties, they change over. I and Mr. Shea and our directors in our conversation thought that it would be more prudent to take a more conservative approach and not over project. And so we set that number at 4%. If a major property turns over, if a few properties turn over next year and that changes, that number might be higher. And we hope it is higher. But we are taking a more conservative approach on that number just to make sure that we don't fall short, because this year's number did come in so low. Interest rates continue to have pressure on it. And we're also, importantly, what we're seeing is the county is slow on their reassessments. They're not, if your property sells today, we're not going to see that reassessment and that new money for a while. And so hopefully next year, some of that tracking, the larger properties and the turnover, but we're also, what an incredible pressure that we're under in San Marino is our properties aren't selling. They are being transferred in ownership, right? Amongst family members. They're being either inherited or gifted to family members, and they're not being reassessed the way that they traditionally used to be. And so where some of those tax breaks are being passed on to generations. Folks are able to continue the legacy of their traditions. And in San Marino, we as a service provider are not keeping pace because those properties are not having the reassessments.
In fiscal year 21-22, we had 320,000 in property transfer taxes, and we'll be about 195 this year, and it's dropped every year since then. So that's part of the problem with the inflation and the cost of the interest rates. Properties aren't selling, so.
Thank you. And another question, a quick question is just about a clarification on this. The Metro Prop A money, of course, it's like fund we cannot use it. So I heard 75 cents on a dollar. Is it a market standard way to do it? Is it a marketplace for trading this, and that's set for like
that's pretty much the standard all throughout LA County is 75% on the dollar. The couple of people we inquired, we asked for more, and they go, no, 75. So, and it would be a local city that borders San Marino, and so that'll help City of San Marino residents as well. So,
thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I appreciate your response and the explanation. However, in the last 8 years, I don't believe we've ever passed a budget that is, in essence, deficit spending. You could call it a balanced budget, but it isn't. And I recall we warned staff, and I realized that there's been staff changeover, that this one-time money that we were getting should not be relied on so that we're not in this situation. And so excuse me if I sound a little annoyed, but I am. I'm also annoyed at the fact that in previous years, we anticipated anything over 4% is growth rate. I remember talking about that every time and being assured, no, 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 no. And it always concerned me. Now it's come back to bite me in the you-know-where. And so I'm aggravated, and I'm going to be asking every department head, what can you cut to bring us down to a balanced budget when they sit up here? And because I'm not going to vote for any budget that isn't at least balanced. It's been my principle all along, and we've been able to find cuts where necessary. Having said that, I do find very interesting the two short-term addressing of the revenue shortfalls, and ask, why aren't we doing that right now to build this into the budget? Why aren't we making a decision on revenues today, or when we approve the budget, that we're going to sell Prop A transit funds and budget revenues for that at 825? Why are we not using the COPS grant funds of $500,000 so that we could bring the revenues up? Why do we have to wait? Why do we have to pass an unbalanced budget and then balance it subsequently when we have these opportunities? Because if we got an asset that we're not using, and that's the Prop A transit fund, let's use it right away to bring this budget into balance. I do appreciate, and I do think we're going to have to take a very serious look at what you talk about in your midterm, and that is operational deficiencies. And we've for years complained about overtime spending, and I realize a lot of that is in public safety and necessary, but we got to find a way. But let me ask this: why aren't we selling off $1 million of excess metro budget as part of this budget? And why are we not transferring available COPS funds to help our police operate in this budget?
Thank you, Council. Thank you, Councilmember Tall. I'll start with the question first and say that with those two items are items that we need policy direction from the council. Staff can't do that without the council's direction.
Well, couldn't have you just put it in a proposed budget and use, I mean, the budget is our policy.
Right. Right. We could have historically my understanding was that the council had been reluctant to sell that money based on conversations with past finance liaisons. So we were operating under the impression that the council historically was not in favor of selling that money. And so we didn't want to broach that topic without having a conversation. And now that might be because I'm new and I may not have the full history here. But we wanted to be transparent and say that that's one option. And that's why it's in the staff report as the immediate fix. So if the council today directs us to do exactly that when this budget comes back before you for adoption in May, we will do exactly that and it'll be a done deal.
Said use it or lose it. And I don't really remember discussing this, but I've not been the financial liaison. Why, if we were going to not use it and lose it, why would we not? If we're going to use it and lose it, why wouldn't we sell it? It's an asset that's there, and if we're not using it, let's get some money out of it.
Agreed. And I will have Mr. Shea add anything more, but what I was told by our former finance director was that it had been the city's desire to try and find ways to spend it here in town if we could, to maximize the dollar and use the full dollar if we could in town. And staff, because of the turnover in different departments, we're trying to spend that money, but we're unable to, and thus we are now left with, we're at the finish line on some of the money expiring, and just have not been able to program it, have not been able to spend it. And we are now at the point where we have to make a decision or start losing a few $100,000 on a year-over-year basis.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Do you want to add?
Part of the problem is, I mean, those two items will fix this year, but they don't go to the structural. And so in talking with Mr. Siegfried and the city manager, we were told that the liaison finance did not want to sell it. And so, and that's probably why we have the workshop now, so we can get direction. The COPS money used to be fairly restricted. Now it's just public safety. We get about 200,000 a year, and the police have been using it for equipment mainly. And so that would be another $200,000 a year you could transfer to the general fund to offset those costs. And how much do we get a year in Prop A, Mark?
Roughly 220,000.
Right. And so usually what
And let me
happens-
ask, and how much of that do we spend a year of the Prop A money?
we have a project that's the parking lot across the street for the bus stop. Other than that, we give some to the school district for their bus systems. But how much, Mark?
That's 160, 150,000, I believe.
Prop A, roughly $420,000 a year revenue in. Operating wise, we spend 150,000 to the school district for recreation trips or trips. Dial ride is roughly $10,000 a year. If people use it, we can spend more, but the use has been about 10,000. Recreation use is about 60,000, give or take, for various trips and senior trips. So, but those we're very limited. It has to be literally transit based, like a bus service, like our own bus service. We don't have that. You can do stuff near the actual bus stops, which is what we've been doing, trying with the parking lots. But you can't just use it for street rehab.
Right.
So
Just,
we use about 200,000. So we only burn 200 and we get 400. So that's where the inequity comes in.
and does anybody have any project in mind where we could use Prop A money?
So we do have some projects, so we can use some portions of that upcoming year, but not to the extent that we're going to be losing it.
Okay, well, why can't then we look at what we're gonna lose if we don't use as opposed to the entire $1 million of excess? If it's coming up for expungement, then we should try to monetize that.
Most cities will do is they
want it longer term.
they'll go 2 or 3 years, accumulate, then spend it, and then
Oh,
they'll
okay.
sell it every third year where they have more money to sell. It makes more attractive to the local cities. So what we would do is sell this year's and then wait like 3 years till it builds up again, and then we would sell it again. So
Okay, well, my question stands. I'd still like to know why we can't, if we could take a look at that as a revenue source, then we should.
And if that ends up being the policy direction from council this morning, we can certainly build that into our budget for the May 31st adoption. The one thing I did want to comment on, Councilmember Tall, your comment about speaking with every department. The topic of making cuts and diving with a scalpel, really going through every budget. Staff and I have been speaking for the past 3 weeks about exactly that, trying to find places that we can trim things and where we can take things out. And certainly over the course of the next few weeks before this budget comes back before the council on May 31st, we can continue to refine that and find places to do that. But we just, from my perspective, I want to let the council know that we feel exactly the same way. Because the structural problem on that you mentioned is something that didn't materialize this year. This is a structural problem that, as you noted, the one-time monies through ARPA, through the different things, is something that has been noted in the budget book for at least the past 2 or 3 years, dating back to at least 21, 22, if I'm not mistaken. And so we recognize that we just have to address it this year. We have to start doing something that
Get ahead of the curve.
get ahead of the curve, because we can cut some stuff, but the cutting of stuff will not address the fact that everything else, as Mr. Shea mentioned, the inflation that we are being hit with costs for our own services, gas prices for our patrol vehicles, insurance costs for this building. We renovated the community center and that insurance and reassessment. We have different things that costs have gone up. Stoneman itself, the way it sits today, the insurance to just keep Stoneman the way it is, the insurance are going up double digits. These are costs that we can't offset. We can cut different things and try and pay less for paper and do different things and stuff like that. But some of these other things we're already at the fringes.
And I believe that, but and that's your knife, but it's our knife that's our job. So I would still like to hear, and if you're on, I'm assuming everybody's going to be honest, but if they look at that and say we're cut to the bone, that's fine. But for example, I looked at the budget and I see some things. Well, maybe we don't need to spend that money this year until we're capable of addressing the systemic problem. So I am going to ask, so be prepared, take a look at it. And even if it's a 0.5%, it's still a 0.5%. You know, 1/4%, anything that you think that you absolutely don't need this year, or that you think you don't need this year, please address it. But thank you.
Vice Mayor?
Thank you, Mayor. I also had some questions regarding the Metro Prop A funds and using them creatively. I know that we're repaving, for example, alleys and our side, some of our other parking areas, as well as we're negotiating or we pay for rental fees for the partial parking lot at the community center. So I'm wondering how extensive, and I don't know if this is something for Mark to answer, Mr. Siegfried, sorry. Because those are all related to parking around community resources as well as bus stops and areas like that, whether it's the schools or our own property. I'm thinking of that side of town, which have the school, the library. Is there some way some of those monies could be used? We have several CIP projects that involve paving and expenses related to that, as well as it comes, you know, a couple different departmental budgets. And I was trying to think, can we, like what's happening here, think out of the box and try to use some of those before they expire so that we could get 100% on the dollar, as opposed to, again, losing 25 cents, because we're not in the position to lose any money.
Regarding the parking lots that are programmed currently, those are the ones that are within, I believe it has to be a certain couple 100 feet of a major bus stop.
Right.
So hence, I had to actually Google map and show them
Oh, I see.
where they were and in relation to, I believe, bus line 87 right here.
Right.
And explain like, this is why we have parking there for people who want to connect to the bus. I could try to reach out and see, but it has to be near a bus stop, can't just be
Right.
any parking lot. or
Isn't
any
there
alley.
one, I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
So it has to be within a certain, I want to say 500 feet. I mean, and there's a certain radius it has to be, hence that's why we picked those two lots across the street. But it can't just be any parking lot that the city owns or any alleyway. It has to be transit related to pretty much a bus stop, not just any parking lot.
Right, so the one that's by the, I'm not 100% whether it is across this, not across this, well, there is one across the street, same line that stops here, stops across from the library directly. But obviously Huntington Drive is probably several hundred feet, but the lot is on our side. And I don't know necessarily, but anyway, and also I think that there's one eastbound that's just across the street, exactly, which would encompass some of those areas of the library and the community center.
Correct. I'll have to pull in the actual
Okay,
details
sure.
from, I had a conversation with Susan Richin at Metro, and she pretty much said,
Understand.
when I initially proposed this project about 2 years ago, she said, what is this project? Can you explain, like, give me a map? And so I had actually, like I said, Google map it and show her exactly where it was so she could, and even show her where the 87 bus line stop was. So you could see that it is within their radius. So I would have to just reach back to her and say, hey, we have another proposed project. Parking lots here. Again, you can see the bus stop. Can you approve this as part of our Prop A funding? And thinking she's pretty quick, so I could probably get a pretty quick answer.
Right, that would be wonderful. And also there's one right in front of Stoneman, and I don't know if we have any money spent, but it might be worth looking at each of our stops along Huntington, that same bus line, because it obviously is something that people take, particularly in town, that stop by some of our community, city buildings, if you will, that may have projects associated with that could help us at least for the most pressing and expiring funds. We could try to get those assigned to a project that we're, whether it's big or small, again, just to utilize the most of it. Because I have a problem. I do think we, over time, thank you, Mark. I don't like to sell it at 75 cents on a dollar if we know that we have things coming, and our obviously streets and parking lots and whatever we're going to do over here long term, whatever we're going to do on Huntington Drive in the commercial corridor long term, those are huge expenses and will involve parking issues, whether it's even redoing how our parking is, diagonal, straight, et cetera, or providing more safety at some of the sites. We have a lot of things we need to do along Huntington. I think we always pick the easy fruit, and that was Mission, but Huntington's a real one that we need to start making investments, both for our consumers, our commercial areas, as well as our residents, to be safer. So I'm, for one, these are money that we should be plowing in. And so I don't want to sell them unless they're expiring and we can't think of what to do with the ones that are termed out this year. But I would not want to sell a portion of it just to get a short term if we're going to be doing some projects. And I know your hands are so full. I'm looking at Director Shaw with projects that could be, that are coming. And I'm also thinking of the ones that we did with the traffic circulation study and at Los Robles, that again, that's a major thoroughfare up there. And it does involve Mission and some of those intersections. And I don't know if Metroway would qualify. You're the expert, Mr. Siegfried. But I'm thinking that we do have active, even if it pays for engineering at this point or for our studies, is that something, or does it have to be like a dig concrete project that's already, I'm asking you again for your expertise, and I don't know if you know the answer now, how much of it could be the planning phase, because we do have, even in the Mission area along Los Robles in particular, I'm thinking of some ways that we might be using that money for curbs and bulb outs and parking improvements that benefit both our community and our public safety transportation.
Property is very stringent in terms of, it has to be for like your own bus line service or a major bus line.
Oh,
So
bus,
it,
right.
it has to be, so you can use it for things like creating a lane, just bus only lane, or
Right.
I mean, so it pretty much has, since we only have one bus line in the city, where I think they cut off the one that was on Los Robles a few
Right.
years ago.
Okay.
Huntington line is
Okay.
literally the only way we can use it. So anything that's Huntington adjacent would be kind of our
Okay.
only option. It's unfortunately we can't use it for street rehab. It has to be like moving people. So traffic synchronization or bus, just getting people around, or even carpooling, things like that, then you can use it, but I have all the list of requirements, but we've tried multiple things, and they kind of come back and say, no, sorry.
Okay.
We've been using Prop C, Measure M, Measure R, drawing those down to do street rehab, especially Prop C. Director Shaw and her crew has really helped me find streets that are used by high traffic for like dial-a-ride and things like that. So we can actually instead of our own money, use the Prop C money as best, and we've done that again this year. So unfortunately, Prop A is very stringent and they haven't changed their guidelines. I wish they could, but yeah, in project, to answer your question, it has to be pretty much Huntington related at best, because that's where our only bus is.
Okay. Thank you very much. And thank you, Director Shaw, for the effort there. The other question that I had was regarding the COPS fund monies. And I thought, and perhaps this is for Chief, or I don't know, we already went through some, I don't have it with me, the equipment expenses in part were the body cameras, the radios and things like that. And I didn't know if we were, before we're using the COPS funds on operating expenditures, are all of those things using other funds, so to speak, that we can qualify for? I thought we had some use, and maybe it's partial.
The COPS money used to be fairly restricted. You couldn't supplement, you had to supplant, or might have got that confused. A few years back, Governor Brown changed the law where he made the 4 new cities in Riverside get their BLF in lieu. And then he made the COPS money a lot more unrestricted. We used to have to file a report with LA County in October. And then at the end of June, we had to say how we spend it, like we had one officer or, 1/5 of an officer or something. But now that money is pretty much unrestricted for law enforcement. And so we've just been using it to buy equipment, and that's why it's built up to over 500,000. So that money is available to use for any public police costs.
Right. So my question was, I don't have it with me because it's another binder. I'm sure I have it at home, and you are both more familiar, and I see you have a nice thick thing there. But I did think that we had already committed some, but I don't know if that's what's left over after what we've already said our COPS fund monies will be going for, or is this the whole nut and we're trying to now put it towards salaries and operating expenses?
Thank you.
And in which case then we already approved, you understand my point? the
Absolutely.
Capital budget, so I don't want to double dip in the same amount of money.
Great question. The short answer is no. This is not the same. The slightly longer answer is, so we have an accumulated fund balance in the COPS money of about $500,000. Is that
At the beginning of this year, we'll be at about 576,000.
576,000 is what the fund balance is, but what the programmatic capital expenditures that the police department is looking at, whether it be the radios, body worn cameras, whatever ends up getting approved, we continue to receive COPS money at the magnitude of about $200,000.
It goes up every year with inflation, but it'll be around 200,000 this year.
So about 200,000 every year. So if we use the about fund balance that we have right now of about 570, that will fill portion of the gap that we have for this year. And then for those capital expenditures that you discussed last month, those would be paid for by the additional funds that we continue to receive on a year-over-year basis. So I believe the body worn cameras were somewhere in the ballpark of 50 or 60 on an annual basis. The radios were about 100-something thousand for the first year. And so we receive enough year over year to continue to pay for those expenses, capital expenses, but for a one-time filling of the pot, the fund balance that we've accumulated and not spent to date could be used for that.
But I know that we talked about the lease expense coming, and we have our police cars in the next short term. So we would have to be building again for some of those major years, like the first year that we actually have the major turnover of our vehicles to make the lease. A lot of them are public safety vehicles that are, I'm sorry, not obviously our fire truck but they're police vehicles. So I'm just wondering again, is it that money better spent always covering our capital? And are we faced with losing, when we look at the COPS fund money, is that something that sunsets or disappears in a certain time? Or this is just, we're accumulating this and we're now going to take it and not apply it in what I thought was the kind of equipment, capital improvement type. We also have, I know that our police department facility needs major renovations in part, or whatever is going to be our big picture regarding the police station. So we have some big expenses in our police in particular that I think the COPS fund money was meant to be, and not to be part again of absorbing operating expenses in any given year. But is it something we can continue to accumulate?
In the past, it was pretty restrictive, like equipment and then officers, right? If you added additional officers, but now it's unrestricted, and we'll get it is a permanent thing. It doesn't sunset, and we're about 200,000 this year, and it goes up every year for inflation. It gets readjusted. This city has technically the last few years used it for capital, like you said. They've got new equipment, and then like the body worn cameras and stuff like that. So we're projecting about 236,000 next year to receive, and we have 161,000 budgeted to spend. So there is a surplus. I mean, we could continue to build it, use the overage for the one time, and then make a decision going forward. We'll use it for additional equipment that the police department needs. So
right, as my co-council member, former Mayor Talt, also suggested, I think it was our policy that these type of things are capital, not something to be used for our operating expenditures. That's something that when we look at a shortfall perhaps in the police department, due to a whole variety of factors, that's something that we should be charging. That's why that's kind of the basis in my mind for a public safety tax. We have to get away from using money that we spend on facilities and equipment, and we need residents to understand this is a shortfall operating and having the police there. We do at the levels that we do in the service, both our police and fire are, 2 minutes away, incredible in our city, but that's what residents pay that for. And so I hate to have us start kicking in $500,000 here or there in this operating unless we really can't do that. And that's what we have. We need to go to the voters and talk about what the public safety tax is for. It's for that. It's for our incredible departments that save us and our families and help our neighbors. So to me, I don't like to mix apples and oranges. And that's why it's, I think, been a policy that we're keeping capital expenses. There's plenty that the police and fire need, or the police need in this particular fund, to do their jobs as at the outstanding level of service that we have. Those are capital expenses. So I'm, for one, would not want to just absorb it in this year's budget. I don't know, we need to think of a policy direction as a group from the council, but I'm not comfortable if we have these expenses coming and we have even bigger expenses in the future and don't know about the public safety tax. I would not be using that money at this year's just to make sure we have a balanced budget unless we can't find funds elsewhere, or can't find those cuts.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Shepherd-Romney. At the end of the day, whether you use the COPS funds or the unassigned fund balance to pay for that, it's a policy direction from the council, just knowing that when we are faced with that capital need, whether it be a patrol vehicle or a building issue, it's really 6 of one or half a dozen of the other. It'll come out of one fund or the other, or it won't get done. If the money doesn't exist, it won't get done. In this year, the reason why we're proposing to use the COPS funds is because we have the ability to, and it'll continue to keep, because it is historically been restricted, no longer restricted, the way that we're programming it. It allows the council a little more flexibility in the out years to continue to maintain the unassigned fund balance where you're not restricted. And that's the same with the Prop A money. That is restricted money. The difference is we're trying to use it and create an unrestricted cash flow issue, or using unassigned fund balance. Really, council's pick.
I have a quick follow-up question there on the COPS fund. I mean, I noticed that we kind of budget in what was mentioned earlier is about 200,000, or I forget the figure, every year, but we budgeted 100,000. Is that suggestion come from the police chief, or is that our finance director? Or I guess where did that number come from? Where we in our budget
The
essentially?
expenditure number comes from the police department. It's their budget.
So historically, it's always been the $100,000 figure that we've marked.
Whatever they need, like capital equipment. It's varied from year to year. CalCop started out at 100,000 about 15 years ago, and now is up to 200,000. And it is a permanent allotment to the city each year, but the expenditure side comes from the police department. So.
Follow up though, if I'm taking a look at page 62 of 170, are you telling me that the $100,000 that is budgeted is for capital equipment, or is that for, I thought it would be for operating expenses. So we do use COPS fund for operating expenses. It's,
Councilmember Tulse looking at the police line item budget on page 62 of the agenda packet. This $100,000, I may ask the chief or the commanders to talk about what that's programmed to specifically. It sounds like it's the CAT RMS software. Okay. CAT RMS. So this is for our CAT RMS software, dispatching software, where patrol cars go, how they get dispatched. So it's being used for software services this year.
which, I mean, but the question the question I'm asking, so as far as budgeting is concerned, this is falling under we are using COPS funds for operating expenses today.
For
And
the
not just
for the CAT RMS, and then the balance is capital. So
I'm sorry, Chief's shaking his head. Come on up, Chief.
I mean,
I believe there's
software is always
Yeah, there's a
an
difference.
interesting-
There's a difference of opinion and semantics here, but yeah.
Good morning, Mayor and City Council.
Morning.
The $100,000 figure you see is traditionally, until more recently, it was $100,000 that we received from the state. Our CAD RMS system, our old system through West Covina PD was $100,000 per year. We switched to a newer system, Mark 43, and we were able to join in a special program through West Covina, who also switched to Mark 43. That reduced our cops expenses to 60-something thousand dollars. That deal has stopped. We're now going to be paying $100,000 a year for our CAD RMS. There are several items in this budget that we are using COPS funds for. There are also the body worn cameras we're using COPS funds for.
But that's a capital equipment.
That's a capital equipment, but however, there's other items in this year's budget, the 24-25 budget, that we will be funding through COPS.
Okay.
Yes, and the fact that there are still some restrictions on these funds. We're going to look at and see if we can use it to pay for our training expenses. We're going to look and see if we can use it for our recruitment expenses. Then we would see a significant amount of funding for fiscal year 24-25 coming from COPS. An important historical context. Prior to nearly everybody here, the information that the department was receiving about the amount of money we had in this fund didn't come to light until 2+ years ago, to where we were surprised at the fact that, wow, there's a significant amount of money in this fund. So we've been moving towards that. We use this money to create programs that are essential for public safety and for community engagement. We use these funds to train our officers. We have an item in here to help train both police and fire for safety and rescue of community members. So you'll see that we have contemplated that need to use more COPS funding whenever we can. Our trailer that we have out there last year, that was COPS fund. So we're fully aware of looking at different funding sources other than the general fund whenever we can. And as I present, you'll see that there's only a 5% increase, plus or minus a point. And that majority of that funding, we will be utilizing COPS funds. And as I said, we will definitely look and see if the training expenses and the recruitment expenses, not personnel expenses. From what we understand, I can't pay for a police officer. There's other grants, and we're applying for a police officer grant through the federal COPS program, which is entirely different than the state's COPS program.
So because what I see in this, well, something, I'll wait till your budget
Sure.
comes up.
Thank you. I hope that explains and puts it more in context.
Thank you,
So
Chief.
yeah, I just want to follow up on kind of along those no questions, but along those lines, it's nice that we have this lump sum, but I think it from my read, it was some sort of miscommunication, or I would have imagined they would have asked for the allocation of COPS budget to spend previously, and this wouldn't have accrued at this rate. So maybe I don't know what the exact process is, but I'm assuming it's going to be continuous conversation with Director of Finance and Police Chief for awareness on this. Is that correct?
Yes, it absolutely will be. And I can't speak to why it was being accumulated or why the department wasn't spending it. But clearly the department's done quite well funding it in different ways. Now we have this accumulation that we can program it, but absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Any other issues? Yes.
One other question before we go. So following up that Metro money and the long-term alternative funding, I just remember we had that 710 measure money remaining, about $18 million. Is there any updates on the process of pursuing that remaining fund?
I don't have an update, but Ms. Shaw, do you have anything or on the Measure 710 money pursuing that you might want to speak to now? I know that's a huge conversation. But she's been looking at this and it's on our work plan.
Thank you for the question. So in regards to Metro 710, there's a couple things in process. So Metro has reached out to us multiple times to get status updates. They report to their board on where the status of our projects are. There is the $14 million that has been allocated to the city that the city's accepted, but we don't have funding agreements for yet. So the current progress is obviously going back, getting all the historical information, because this was brought before the council in 2019, I believe it was. I'd have to go back to my notes, but it was presented exhibits that the former director had presented to the council on proposals for how that money could be spent for the two projects. One's primarily focused down mostly at Garfield and Huntington, and the other projects kind of spread throughout the corridor from Virginia down to San Gabriel roughly. Are basically the two project locations. I'm working with our on-call traffic engineering consultant, TransTech, to get proposals from them to assist with the development of the documents that are required by Metro to execute the funding agreements. So the plan is once I have that proposal from them, I can come to council, refresh the council on what was previously presented to the council at the time for what those projects would entail. And then we can have the documents prepared and get the funding agreements executed so that we can begin work on those projects. Was there more to that question that you were looking for?
And then the remaining fund will stay the same, or it will be reducing as other cities may be pursuing the total balance, or that's actually allocated and reserved there, just until we have the funding proposal.
Correct. So that money, yeah, that money's
And it
just
will
being
not
held
be
by
touched.
Metro.
Good.
So we've told them, we're working on the funding agreement, it's coming. So they've just showed that there's a lot of projects, not just our city, that have been delayed. There's a lot of work that's through that, that's been through the Metro 710 money. And so they just continue to update that. So we're not in a use it or lose it situation.
Not decrease.
It's not decreasing. I mean, the only caveat I would say to that is looking at the significant inflation and cost increase that we've seen, to the extent that what was previously proposed could actually be constructed within the project budget. That would be the concern. So not that the money is decreasing, it just may not go as far as originally expected. So those are things we're going to have to look at as we begin to put the funding agreements together, get updated costs for what has been proposed to be included in the project, and then obviously ensure that everything that was previously proposed is approved by Metro as being eligible expenses to be covered by that money. So that's kind of where we're at in that process. But it's not decreasing, it's just how far it's going to go is going to be the question.
Yeah, can I just, with respect to Atlantic Garfield, Huntington, given the housing element may indeed have housing in that area, that is something also to consider when we go back and think about it. So make sure that although a developer would probably have to pay for part of it anyway, but just to keep that in mind, depending upon how the housing element ends up.
Yes, exactly. And obviously there's a lot of coordination with our neighboring cities that's involved in that project as well, because we have the border there. So
I remember that was, let me just interject along the same lines. That particular intersection was a problem. I don't know that an agreement had ever been reached with the cities of South Pass and Alhambra because we had some initial meetings, but obviously there's been council turnover, staff turnover, and even those were pretty ineffectual at the time. And now with the housing element, and I believe South Pass has produced or finalized perhaps some pretty aggressive building in that area. I suspect that the present council will have a great interest in what's going to happen with the development of that intersection. So whatever work was suggested, even on paper as being a possibility, will have changed radically along with the costs. As for our own, I believe the project from the prior director of Public Works, Mr. Throne, focused on the schools and the parking and major carve outs at Valentine, Huntington, et cetera, and completely rerouting the parking and traffic. And I don't recall so much the high school, how that was going to work. I'm sure you do.
I do.
And so
There is.
it
yeah,
needed
just
a
look
lot.
at it.
Yeah, it needed a lot. So that will be something that will have to be brought back even before council and public safety, before that even would be considered in its present form. We did not get to
Exactly.
that point. Okay.
Right, exactly. And so that was my, in working with Trans Tech to get a proposal for them, just to get the level of effort to
Fine.
prepare the documents we need.
Fine.
I want to bring that along with a refresher, like this is what was proposed, this is what we think is viable, not viable.
Thank you.
And get the council to weigh in on that, because the last thing I want to do is have them prepare documents for a project that we bring to the council and then the
Exactly.
council's like, what, why are,
Right.
so, yes,
Okay.
exactly.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right, can we start with the budget, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. These next two slides, we'll move past that. These are just highlighting the priority initiatives that have been discussed with the council and the community over the past, 5 months now. Big items here that have been proposed by departments and for conversation, the public safety parcel tax, body worn cameras. A big popular one is the traffic safety recommendations and implementation thereof. Some mandated things that we have to do, the general plan update, housing element, and the continuous planning for the future of Stoneman. This next slide just rounds us out, and this speaks to some of the items that we had talked about, which to help us build our structural revenues, our cost of service study, obviously bringing in finance director recruitment. That recruitment closes today, this afternoon. Public facing permit system, while no costs, but we're again looking at streamlining operations and way to improve services. Asset management and our fleet enterprise model, to be able to reduce our long-term costs, reduce our long-term liabilities. And the last one that was added there was consideration of a joint use agreement with the school district, which we're working on and has unidentified costs at this time, but will be before the council at some point. Next, I'll start our departmental budgets. I will begin with the city council. The city council departmental budget has a proposed budget of $33,000 strictly for services and supplies. The entirety of that is for services and supplies. Modest increases here relate to some training. We have an election coming up in November where 2 of our council members' seats will be open based on term limits. And so we've programmed some additional funding for the newly elected council members to attend some trainings and academies, as well as some small monies here, a few $100s for hospitality at our council meetings, as well as memberships and dues that increase for the city's participation. So these are participation and memberships related to the cities and where they are charged to the city council department budgets. Any questions on this one before I move forward?
Yes, I don't think we have travel and meetings over the years that I know what you're saying. We'll have 2 new council members, but I don't think we should be increasing this at all. We are so underutilizing this amount. I think we should be at 0 for our proposed budget increase. Again, to reflect, this is just every year we budget a significant amount and we don't use it. And so even with 2, I don't see us going up. We've spent 1,270, 600. It's about 600 or 700 for a new council member to achieve or attend some of these things. I'm looking at the travel and meetings. So I would not, even with new ones, which we just had 2 new that were onboarded and I think successfully. And I know that they've attended some meetings. So anyway, that's just my 2 cents. We don't need to talk about it, but we could cut that down to back the way it was or less.
I concur.
Yeah. Fair. So if I'm hearing a consensus on that, on the travel and meetings, we will remove the $600 increase from this
But
batch.
on that note,
Can
to
even
attract,
increase
yeah,
it.
to attract, people
We'll have
from
money.
running, we should, triple the council's pay and maybe.
Yes, it's 0, 0, 0. Okay.
And maybe,
Get back pay too.
Yeah, next to 0 for you.
And we can cut out pay.
Extra
And
0.
for the viewing public, I just want to clarify that the council gets no compensation for any of this work that they put in. So, all right, so we will remove $600 from the travel. Perfect.
No. You're
I was
budgeting $600. Your travel and meeting is 4,900
Correct.
proposed, and what we're suggesting is that we don't spend that much, so let's go to 1,200, yeah. We go 1,200, so.
okay. So no, would we propose that we cut it down to, I don't know off the top of my head what the membership and the attendance for those two academies are next year, but I imagine they're probably going to be more than 600 per person. Would you like us to keep it at 2,000 flat or just keep it at 600 or 1,200? What was the proposal? Zero, whatever you would like. It's totally up to the council.
What, sorry, what is?
We're looking at the council's talk on page
Yeah, but-
14 of 170. It's account number 101-01-4480, travel and meetings for the council.
But I mean, what is that actually? We have so is it just transportation? Is that what we're talking about?
All right.
Yeah, again, all
This-
those.
Right, so there's
But
one in
that's in-
Sacramento and one's here usually, and the new council members might want to attend the first one because.
But
the
is
new
that under
leaders and-
memberships and dues?
No, the travel meetings would also cover things like attendance at next week's SCAG annual conference, for
What is
example.
that? I'm
The
just
Southern.
kidding. No.
Going?
Never been.
No,
I went once.
I'll be there.
You went?
I
Oh my
I
God.
once.
But it's just right here in Monrovia. So
Yeah, this year's is it's in Palm Desert.
Palm
The
Desert.
annual one is in Palm Desert for a day and a half. But it's totally up to the council. I mean, the council typically, as you mentioned, pays for these out of pocket. We budget it just to, it's typical for cities to budget it just in case the council.
Right, but I'm just looking at year over year. Let's just look at what we actually do
Mhm.
spend, the actuals. So I see membership and dues is spent because that covers a lot of things are in there. So I'm not talking about that or materials or hospitality. I was just focusing on the almost $5,000 for travel and meetings where we're I mean, once we were at 1,200 and most recently most recently is 600. So that can go down to 1,000, I think.
Is this just transportation and like those monthly meetings for SCAG and stuff like that?
So I'm looking at the title sheet where we talk about, so this has several things. It also has
And you
the,
get it, like you like.
Travel,
Like
essentially.
see.
correct. So we have conferences either where it's conference or travel to and from or lodging at our insurance seminars, our Southern California Association governments, the league conferences. So the league conference would be the new council members academy, or there's an executive forum that they hold. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's up to,
Yeah.
okay.
What do you propose?
$1,200.
1,200, all right,
Done.
is everybody okay with that?
Yep.
1,200, yes, okay.
Perfect savings already.
All right.
Hey,
No, this is, and we recognize there's no,
much yet? No?
No,
well, we
no.
just cut the budget for it.
We're ordering lunch.
We
Right.
recognize, and I will say, we recognize that this is a different budget. It's my first budget with the city council, and I appreciate you all indulging us. This is difficult because we have been forecasting this position, but we haven't addressed this position. So today's the day that we start to do this.
Right.
This next item is the city attorney's budget. I will start off by saying that in conversations with my city attorney next to me on my left, he has already offered that we will be removing that 25,000. So this will be just a reduction in our COVID expenses, and we will be removing 25,000 from that increase because we had budgeted an increase in the cap, and Mr. Montez is mentioning that there will not be an increase in the cap. He can elaborate as necessary.
No, you don't need to elaborate. We accept your representation.
All right, we'll move right along. Right. This particular budget here is my office and my department. This has gone up modestly in a couple areas, largely related to over the course of the last year. We have the election coming up. There is a small savings as we've moved our OpenGov, our bidding software over to our non-departmental as it services the entire city. We've got sizable expenses related to the election upcoming this year, partly because we've got two major things. We've got council members that will be on the ballot as well as the public safety parcel tax. So that and working with the county is a sizable expense. On the
Where is that on your budget? Is that under other contract services?
the $50,000, it is a separate line item specifically related to elections.
Oh, I see it. Yes.
There on that item, following that, we have adjustments to our trainings and costs with representing San Marino over the last couple years where we've had interim city managers and different associations and representation that we have not been attending. Just last week, 2 weeks ago, I had the pleasure of representing San Marino at our legislative advocacy day and meeting with our state representatives. That's where those costs are. We're actually truing up those costs that we have not been seeing over the past several years. And the last item here relates to our mailer, our resident mailer that we send out twice a year. We had budgeted about $10,000 last year, and in actually carrying that out, we've seen that the costs have gone up and were not budgeted exactly where they needed to be. Translation services as well as postage has gone up, and so that is the modest increase on that item there. One item that is not reflected on this budget that we will make the adjustment for, we had some part-time salaries in our office that we do need to adjust for as we're trying to keep up with the growing wages around us, particularly in the part-time. As you're seeing minimum wages go up, you will see us adjust the part-time wages on this one before the next budget adoption. So I did want to draw attention, while it's not included here, we will need to make that adjustment to make sure that we keep our staff in that office. Any questions before I move to the next item?
Can I-
do.
Okay.
What goes into the other contract services, which has been doubled?
Right, that was what I was gonna say. It should go up by 33,000, so I'm getting around 92,000 because it includes the new, if you go back to page 18, the cost center is moving the OpenGov bidding software. A decrease, so I also don't know where, if it's decreasing in that, why are we doubling it nearly? And the travel and meetings the same. I know you're catching up, but
Absolutely.
11,000
Translation
is 20.
services. There is a translation services at 75. Other contract services for IT, we have
Not that, it's the one above it. Just
the
plain
first line,
other contract
under service
services.
and supplies.
You spent 58 last year, you estimate 58, and you
correct. Money was not spent. So there was revised budget in the other contract services. We had in fact budgeted 119,000. Part of that is due to money that we had not spent in translation services, money that we have not spent in strategic plan implementation. So while we had budgeted that money, we have not been able to carry out that work yet. And so we're hopeful that we'll be able to start the strategic plan implementation, start some work related to, expand some of our translation services. There are different things in here that we just haven't had the need for that money, so we've saved some of it. But keeping that in there in the event that we want to translate housing element items, or we can cut some of that if you'd like.
Yeah, I am fully in, and I was surprised actually, and I brought this because there's nothing here that's in translated. Now, did my house not get it? Not that I don't want to assume that any house, anybody's making a judgment that I speak Mandarin or Chinese or I don't. I know.
I didn't get that
can
one.
Speak. You didn't get this one? So,
I got
No,
Mandarin.
but I do have a problem if we're sending out to all residents and we don't have even a QR code to do it translated on our website or something. I mean, we've got and a statement here, go to the website for the I'm not saying we have to, or we should have larger mailers to have two languages, but at least we should be reflecting this is critical. And I was surprised we did not have a turnout that I expected from some segments of our population. It's because of translation. I believe that they didn't know that the housing element discussion was happening, not that they're not interested, or people, I think all residents are fundamentally interested in this. So this isn't an issue for me. And so I don't think we need to leave this money up if we're not spending it. we're not spending it. That's not a leave here and carry forward in a year when every department needs to cut.
Absolutely. And that was, I appreciate you recognizing that and addressing that. We are in the, what I would call growing pains of learning where we need to spend that money on translation services. Absent that money, with this feedback, we wouldn't have the funding to actually make those translations for the upcoming process. But what I will say is that we received feedback from this council, helpful feedback exactly along those lines, that the resident mailer initially didn't have a QR code on there to send to translation services. The second edition, the first one we did together, has that QR code and is fully translated on the website. So we're trying to find ways to use that where the council would like us to. But again, if it's the council's prerogative to just whittle that down just a little bit here, we're happy to do it. It's up to you.
Down. So if we are putting the QR code to the translated, then it should say in one line, which will cost you very little. I mean, obviously the full translation costs a lot, but it should say for full translation in Chinese, use the QR code, because people don't even know if it comes in English, or if this came to me in another language, I would throw it away because I don't understand it. So we have to put ourselves in the shoes of residents who get something that is entirely in English, not even with a line that says in the foreign languages where it is available, whether that's Spanish, Chinese, I don't know what our residents need, but we need to put that in the language on the item.
Thank you. Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you.
No, just a question on that too. So the estimate is only half. So do you think we need a budget 120, or can we just cut it down to 60,000?
There's more than just the translation. You said that part of that is for strategic planning.
Correct. There is a $25,000 cost for strategic plan implementation activities, which we have not embarked on. I believe the last strategic plan that this city has is 5 or 10 years old. Does anyone in here? It was not in. So
6 years old.
6 years old. So that is with typically.
We don't need to do it. We have housing element. We have a general plan we haven't adopted. We need to prioritize what is pressing and focus on just getting those things done. It's overwhelming for everybody in our community as well. So we don't need money for things that we know we're not going to achieve. If we get the housing element done, if we get a general plan done, which we've also postponed for years, let's not add more to everybody's plate. Let's focus on things, spend on things to accomplish things. I'm
Absolutely.
sorry.
No. We're happy to do
I
it.
cannot go forward with putting placeholders in our budget anymore because we can't. It's not anybody's fault in this room. It's not just not.
We will
So
remove the.
strategic plan is important, but we need to think about doing that after we've achieved all the things we
You
need
just
to
don't
do.
want to do it when you're mayor.
Hey, I got you.
All right, so move it. No.
So we will.
I was at that exercise and it was many days of, wait, lots of fun with friends, but painful. Okay.
Perfect. Well, so we will cut 25 out of our other contract services for that.
And you guys could do it.
Yeah, it is. So we've already saved 50,000 between our attorney and our contract services. El Molino Viejo, this is exactly the same as it's always been.
Can't do anything there.
Any questions?
No.
And I'm going to turn it back over to Mr. Shea to talk about the finance department.
Our proposed budget is 993,000, 631,000 of personnel and 361,000 of supplies and services. We have an increase of 42,000 in other contract services to complete the citywide fee study. 19,000 increase in contract services for IT for the transfer of OpenGov bidding software to the CMO budget. Any questions on the finance? It's the best department in the city. No, just kidding. Non-departmental, there's a few changes in the non-departmental this year. So the proposed budget is 3.5 million. The personnel is 300,000, which is the OPEB plan, which is the medical benefits for retirees. And then the current contribution to our CERT. We have 840,000 of the unfunded accrued liability. And so we transferred in prior fiscal years, that amount would have been allocated to all non-public safety personnel costs, but it really isn't applicable to anybody that's here. It's more of a debt service. So a lot of cities are moving that out and putting it over in non-departmental. And so that's 840,000. And then 2.4 million plus debt service this year is zero. So the 575,000 in debt service payments, we paid off those bonds in this current fiscal year. 840,000 moved from the city's unfunded accrued liability for non-sworn departments, plus 31,000 for contractual IT services, 16,000 for depreciation of equipment, and then 976,000. We moved the insurance for the city into this department because it covers all city and doesn't really belong over in the HR department. So that was moved to here. And so any questions on these costs?
Okay, move next on.
Human resources. Yay, somebody else. Oh, you'll click it first.
I'll advance the slide.
No, I do have a question, and it's based upon my finance ignorance, but it's something that I think needs to be pointed out, and that is the equipment cost allocation. The equipment cost allocation is a non-monetary budgeting. How does that work out when we're talking about a $1.5 million deficit? Does that deficit include this equipment cost allocation? Or does it show up someplace else?
Lots of looking around.
Mr. Siegfried's going to help us out on this one.
I mean, if it's non-budget, maybe then we don't have to invade our savings to pay for something that is a non-budget. I'm just trying to figure that part out.
Right, that's all.
Mr. Siegfried is looking at the overall and the fund balances and how it tracks. So as he finds that, do you want to answer it, or do you want to take a minute and we can go to a different, just 1 minute?
Okay.
Would you, while he looks that up, maybe we start,
Can have a few minutes.
Thank you.
thank you, sir.
Please, I'm-
Ms. Guerrero, please drive us through the Human Resources Department.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, Mayor, Vice Mayor,
Good
and
morning.
council members. I'm pleased to present you with the HR department budget for fiscal year 24-25. This budget is mainly a status quo budget. In our personnel budget, our full-time equivalence remains at 2, unchanged from the current budget. In our services and supplies budget, there is a 51% decrease from the current budget. And this is primarily related to the movement of certain expenses from the HR budget to the non-departmental, specifically a decrease of $767,000 related to liability insurance premiums to CJPIA, and a decrease of $9,000 related to health insurance administrative fees. In addition, there's also an $11,000 increase in contract services related to recruitment and retention. In the past, there were recruitment onboarding costs that were either not built into the budget, or we didn't allocate sufficient monies that we have included in this next year's budget. These costs are related to background checks, pre-employment physicals, job ads, testing materials for new hires, and promotions. This concludes my report. I'm available for any questions.
Question?
Yeah, there's a lot of this that doesn't make sense to me. And that is, how do we move out $766,000 but only end up with $129,000 in savings?
So we only highlight anything that has about a $5,000 variance. So there are other costs within my budget line items that had increases or decreases that didn't meet that threshold. Let me look through mine.
There's a $600,000. Oh, I'm sorry. I was looking at never mind. But could staff do me a favor? Over my years, we've played around with where to put insurance premiums, where to put workers' comp, where to put or pension items and so forth. And they move here and they move here and they move here, which makes it difficult to track. Would we just stick with one? And I realize this isn't your doing, that this was the way. Could we just stick with one so that I'm not looking at these savings, not that I'll be looking at the savings in the future. Could we at least come up with a plan and stick with it rather than move this stuff around?
Yes, and that is exactly what my thought was when Mr. Shea and I and Mr. Siegfried and Miss Hahn, and we all talked about this in different times. It is difficult for the public and for the council to track them when these line items, when non-departmentals are spread across different departments. They're paying for different, essentially the same thing, but we're spreading the cost in different lines. My intention was on, as we've talked about transparency, it's easier for me and it's easier for you and the public to look at one non-departmental and see exactly where it is. And so moving forward, as your new city manager, that's where I like to see it. And so our goal is to keep it right there. You can see your unfunded liabilities, your insurance, everything that applies to overall everybody. We're going to keep it there so you don't have to go through and add up and say, oh, in police, the UAL was 500,000, in HR, it was this. You'll see it all in one spot now.
We're told a couple of years ago, and granted, most of you weren't here. We were told years ago, we had it this way, and then we're going to move it into the individual budgets because it's more transparent and it's the proper, and we say, okay, so.
What you said
just-
that, I don't know. I'm not sure I ever say, well, okay.
Yeah, I don't think I ever said it either, but just understand that, because let's just come up with a plan and do it that way for at least the next 8 months. And then, no, for years to come, because it's hard to track.
He won't be here next year. Don't worry.
Can I also add one, I'm looking at page 44, 170, and it's about the workers' comp claims and the cumulative workers' comp days off. And we are now pushing, well, we're over 750 days off. Now, that is a shocking number for any city, a city of our size. And I know that there are a variety of factors that affect that, but even just looking at, last year was we don't have the ones before, but last year was a bumper year as well. So I see that we're in this direction, but putting them all together again does a disservice to our community, because nobody understands what that means and where these employee loss or absenteeism, not whatever, or days off. I'm not saying this all happens, but not understanding where and how that affects our budget again, because I can't look at this and say, okay, that makes me understand much later in here is our overtime. And that's in different things. And those costs are, again, through the roof. If I know that we have workers' comp as a person, or in particularly heavy in certain areas, and I then see the overtime, that makes sense in my head. Okay, that's what we had to do. Those are costs that are part of it. But again, moving this here, but without the accompanying overtime isn't helping anybody understand the process of where the costs are born.
I'm going to take a
stab.
stab. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, absolutely, Councilmember Shepherd-Romney. I'm going to take a stab at this and then turn it over to my HR director. What I'm hearing is that while we're trying to bring it all into one place, what we can also do is in this non-departmental, we can then probably break out these numbers and show in that non-departmental how much belongs to PD. So on that slide that you saw, the UAL slide, about a dozen slides ago, that showed how much went to police, how much went to fire, how much went to, we can expand on that in this non-departmental section and show here's how much of this is associated with these different departments, but it's all being booked into this.
That's fine. That would be very helpful, because you just look later and it becomes like people shouldn't have to trace down through something of this size.
Agreed.
To understand.
Ms. Guerrero, would you like to expand on, I don't know how much legally you can expand, but if you'd like to expand on the cumulative workers' comp days off and no, she's an expert. She knows what she
Left running.
all right, you saw that?
That means no. So we are, over the last several months, we've looked at our metrics that actually are presented to council every month. Every department is looking at their metrics and we're trying to figure out, are we relaying the right information? Is it easy for somebody that just picks up the book to understand what we're trying to relay to them? And so this is an area that we have identified, at least in HR, when it comes to workers' comp, where these claims are coming from, performance evaluations, where those stats are coming from, broken out by department. So we will be looking at expanding that on the monthly metrics that the council gets, and then also obviously into the annual one that you get. As far as the cumulative workers' comp days off, a lot of the injuries that the employees went out on were not something that happened, yesterday. A lot of them have occurred in the years past, and they just, whether timing, wasn't the best time for them to take off because we were short-staffed and their injury could hold off. A lot of them held off. It came to a point where they just couldn't hold off anymore, and they just needed to take the time off to go and get themselves treated. So those are very difficult to manage. But I agree with you. Knowing where those are coming from, by what departments, it would make it easier for you to correlate other expenses. If they're off, we have to backfill, and so therefore you should expect to see an increase in in overtime costs. Thank you. You're welcome.
Any other questions? Seeing none. Next.
Do we want to go back to Mr. Talt's question,
you.
that Mr. Siegfried had? Do you want to highlight that on the depreciation?
So depreciation this year is 658,456. So, and then which is non-departmental division repaying our capital equipment fund. That's revenue coming into the capital equipment fund. We're spending $656,000 of expenditures out. So it's pretty much a break even. So out of that 1.3 million we're under, it's included.
Okay.
So it's, $2,000. I don't know. So it's pretty much a break even though, repaying more than the expenses we're gonna have this year. We base the depreciation off current assets we already have and the life of them. And also, so I have to go through each division and all the equipment, figure out if it's a 5-year, 7-year, 10-year life, and then what our annual depreciation is on those assets. And that comes out to be $658,000 next year, which is roughly what we're gonna spend next year on new assets. And then I kind of have to guess like when we're going to implement those assets. So, but it is a break even. So it is included though, to answer your question, it is included as part of the $1.4 million.
Okay. I think I follow.
If
If I
have
have
a
any further
chart I can
questions,
give
Mark,
you.
I could give you a call or give Philippe a call. I don't want to.
I can email you a spreadsheet where you can see it.
If you
flow.
could, I'd appreciate it. Actually, probably send it to all of us. Yeah. Thank you, Mark.
Next, I'm going to invite up Mr. Figueroa, who's going to do our Community Development Department.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor, Vice Mayor, City
Morning.
Council members. Thank you for the opportunity to present the Community Development Department's budget. For the second year in a row, it's a status quo budget. The only reason we're asking for an increase is to cover the cost of the completion of the housing element, hopefully. And also I like to announce that I'm pleased to announce that for the first time, all of our positions are filled. So really appreciate the support that the council has given staff, and we really appreciate that. And because of that, we are asking for an increase in software licenses, just because now we have more bodies and we want to make sure that we respond to the requests and needs of our residents. And we're also been processing a lot of the DRC Plan Commission projects, and because of that, there's been an increase in both packets and repair to printers. In regards to uniforms, per the MOU, every other year, we provide field employees with additional uniforms. However, this number will actually come down. We received clarification in terms of what our maintenance obligation is. So this should come down 40 to 50%. That concludes my presentation. I'm available for any questions.
Questions?
Just a quick question on the ADU applications and the permits. So since that's gonna be a big, big important part of our housing elements anyways. So I saw there's a pretty significant drop, for the applications comparing to last year. Do you see a reason?
Inflation, backlog in construction material, financing. So I think those are the main reasons.
Vice Mayor?
Thank you, Mayor. So the service and supplies that we're anticipating a savings, none of those, you're just carrying forward because either the sums weren't, or the programs weren't utilized or things like that as a forward. We're not actually reducing that line item. Am I correct?
Correct.
And then I just had, because a couple of these things did make me think the PFAL, I know because we'll get questions. It's a small amount, but this program is continuing. It's just that the gentleman who, or the company, an individual, who previously did it retired, but we have found another person after the nesting period because we have increasing amounts of PFAL, occupying parts of our city. And so I know that people are anxious to get that same program underway, and I don't know if the avian flu is affecting the ability to implement it this year.
No, we are currently working to complete the contract with the new vendor.
Okay.
Unfortunately, with the loss of our management analyst, that kind of had to be put on hold, but our new management analyst starts in a couple weeks, so we'll have that completed relatively pretty soon.
Okay, and it will take effect whenever, because usually they
Within
don't set them
right.
out right now anyway.
Right.
Because of the nesting. The other question I have is for the tree incentive program. Has any information gone out on anything or in like I'm thinking of the community services mailer. We do have a lot of new families coming in and people have lost trees. And so, or Laurel Hall, our urban forester, I don't know if guidelines need to be, drawn out for more specific what can
Sure.
be purchased, but I'm anxious for that because a lot of people have lost trees and we have new families moving into town who might not be aware that this program even exists that could help them.
We have not,
But I know you're busy.
well, actually, there's a reason correlated to that. We actually receive calls about either donating trees or paying an in lieu fee as opposed to planting new trees. So we actually, well, it's an option that we have, but it's not an option that people actually will like to take advantage of. So if there were to be discussions about budgetary cuts, that could be one that we can focus on, since we are actually getting the opposite. And we could, as part of our efforts to revamp the tree ordinance, we could actually incorporate that into it, so we have the ability to receive money or donations.
Right, but I see a long-term problem. If people want to remove trees and they are technically required to replace trees on their property, but they don't want to, and they'll give money, that's not really
No.
replanting the trees from the benefit of our city, our neighbors, the streetscape, the front yard guidelines were that every front yard's supposed to have a tree.
Sure.
I mean, so that's what this fund is for. So but anyway, that is a discussion when we
Exactly.
revise the tree ordinance.
Correct.
Because there's a number of issues and we need
Correct.
to improve it. And I have no problem, but I just wanted to make sure that at some point we are advocating that this is available to new arrivals, however it's done.
Sure.
That's all.
I'm just curious, how many field employees do we have?
For community development, we have
Because I'm looking at the annual uniform purchase.
for uniform for community development, we have 5. Code enforcement and building inspector.
How many uniforms are they getting each?
10 shirts, 10 pants, and every other year a field jacket.
Thank you. No more, any questions? Mhm. All right, thank you. Next, please.
Next, Ms. Shaw will go over our Parks and Public Works Department.
Thank you. Good morning, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and Council. I'm happy to present our Parks and Public Works budget. You'll notice here, so our budget shows roughly a 21.5% increase to equipment and supplies. That at face value would seem significant. There's a few things I want to explain that make up that 21.5%. A big portion of that obviously comes from as you may recall, we recently approved our new janitorial contract. We've had janitorial services, but we approved a new contract with a new vendor. We saw increases in that contract. Similarly, in other contracts that we have, such as Mariposa or street sweeping with Athens, they have inflationary increases, not that we've executed new agreements with them. So there is increases just to contracts based on that. So on the slide, you'll see there's a 26,000 for the janitorial service contract. In building repair and maintenance, this is primarily looking at a lot of the deferred maintenance we've had at our facilities. There's things that we've continued to put off because we don't have a budget to support some of the repairs that are needed unless they're urgent. So we're proposing a $40,000 budget here. If we needed to discuss an item, as was brought up earlier, to take a fine tooth to, that would be one potential area. But I would caution that we just have a lot of deferred maintenance and building needs to continue to kick the can down the road could be more detrimental than it is helpful. So that would be something to take into consideration. The other item is our priority initiative that you've seen at earlier budget meetings this year to enhance service delivery through our asset management software, the road level asset inventory, and our sidewalk assessment. This is, $150,000 is a significant cost. I would say approximately 80% of that cost is primarily one time. You'll see a significant decrease in that. Really, the only ongoing cost that would continue forward in future budget years would be the annual subscription for whichever asset management software we would bring to the council as a contract for execution. And also to help offset some of that, I'm looking to the extent that I can offset that annual subscription cost with trying to roll in our GoGov citizen request portal as part of this system. We're currently paying, I think, 11,000 plus or minus there. So to the extent that I can roll that into our asset management software, it actually probably won't be as much of an ongoing impact to the budget. And this priority initiative will be extremely important, not only to understand the condition of our assets, but for helping us strategically and more accurately get an assessment of what our assets are and what the costs associated with continuing to maintain and improve those should be. So where we do have different buckets of money for our different assets, to actually get a picture of what those asset costs are to continue to maintenance and or plan for capital costs, this software will be tremendously important for that. So that is that item there. And then the next item on here, the next most significant increase is for sewer system management plan. We have our 5-year update. We have a 3-year audit that's required. So there's a lot of regulatory reporting and compliance plans and reports that we are going to be due this year. We also have a trash TMDL study that's due every 5 years that's due this year. And the thing that I want to highlight here is in previous budget years, a lot of these costs were put in the CIP budget, which realistically, it's not an asset. It's a plan, it's a report, it's an engineering document that we're required to produce. It's not an asset that you would depreciate or consider as a capital project. And so to the extent that it's more transparent to show what our true engineering and reporting and compliance reporting costs are, it's really an operating expense. And those will fluctuate each year based on when things are due. So like I said, this is, roughly a 5-year plan. We have some, the 3-year audit. We have the 5-year trash TMDL. So there's a few of those costs. So we're showing that shift from CIP into operating. So that's also showing an increase. If you exclude some of those costs, really our increase is probably more around 8% to our budget, taking into account the contracts and other things, water utilities, and some items that we just don't have a lot of control over. But to the extent that we can go back and see if there's anywhere to shave some additional money, of course, we'll look at those options. I'm happy to take any questions.
Questions? None?
I appreciate your effort going back and seeing if you could cut any costs.
Yeah, I mean, yes, but specifically looking at sewer, one there, and I was already working on it before this. We show that's actually probably another one. There wasn't a spot for our required storm storm drain catch basin cleaning program. We've contracted with the county, but never really had a spot in our budget. So that's been put into the budget. But also now I'm looking at it, and typically when you go with a large contract, you usually see savings there, and looking at the cost that the county is passing on to us, it seems quite high. So that's another location. We put it into the budget, but I'm hoping it's something, as I'm talking to a few vendors to see if we really want to go with the county for this upcoming year. We probably won't, because it looks like it's quite a bit more than we should be paying. So to the best that I can, I'm trying to make those cuts.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Next, please.
Thank you, Ms. Shaw. Next is going to be our Community Services Department, presented by Director Johnson.
Page that.
Good morning.
Hi, good morning, Mayor Wong, Vice Mayor Shepherd Rami, and council members. The community services budget, we do have 4 slides. I'll go quickly. In future years, we've agreed we will condense this down to 1 slide, but I get the good fortune of having 4 very quick slides. The budget is comprised of 3 operating divisions. The first slide, however, does represent a summary of the department's operating budget request as a whole. And I'm pleased to report that we are submitting a status quo budget. The left column area on this main slide does represent our revenue that we are budgeting for at 1.3 million. The recreation division will be generating 1.1 million, and our library division will be collecting projected at 220,000. On the expenditure side for the department as a whole, we have a $4.2 million budget, with personnel making up 3 million and services and supplies at 1.2. Our personnel differences in this area, the decrease is primarily due to the non-departmental activity that finance director spoke of that's being removed from the departments and moved over into the finance area. Our FTE decrease there, that 0.61, is directly due to the elimination of our Little Learners 4- and 5-year-old class, but over at the Stoneman. But we'll talk about that a little bit later. But it is also offset by an increase in part-time hours for a new after-school program called Kit Crew, and then also some hours that we have added for 4th of July parade management. In our services and supplies area on this slide, there is an increase of 12,000, and which is only about 1%, and we will go into greater detail in subsequent slides. The first division within the department's operating budget is what we refer to as the administrative division. This division equally supports the direct service delivery of the rec division and the library division. It's budgeted at 820,000. The majority of that being personnel that support both divisions, and then services and supplies is at 107. In the personnel area, we are increasing by 47,000. However, that is directly tied to MOU salary and benefits impact. And then the service and supplies slide, or excuse me, the service and supply area, the detail is listed at an increase of 8,000. And you can see the detail there. 3,000 is related to a new expense with live scanning our volunteers, which we had never done before. Question?
Is that something, the live scan for volunteers, is that city volunteers?
Yes, it is.
And is this a service? A lot of organizations are required to get that if they deal with youth.
Exactly.
Singular. I'm thinking Scouts, Hill Harbison House, all these places in town. Some of our the volunteers have to have live scan, and it's difficult because live scan places have come and go. I think there was one on Huntington. Anyway, so I'm just asking, this might be also a profit making, like our library does for passport services, if this is something, but I don't have a sense from you. And so I'm asking this completely. I did not know this existed here. If this would be something that we would put to some youth groups, I think our coaches as well at the high school, a lot of people have to be live scanned now to in our community, whether they
Yeah,
volunteer.
This is actually an expense.
Right, but I'm saying
to
if you
us.
charge people who would otherwise be paying for it elsewhere, I don't know if that's something.
It's a great point, Vice Mayor. It's actually a function out of our police department. Our police department does live scanning. There are costs associated with it, but we can definitely advertise that we do it. I don't know that we have,
Oh, okay.
we'd have to
because-
work on some staffing because it's interestingly enough, our dispatchers, if you don't know for the viewing public, the council knows this, our dispatchers answer the telephones, they answer the 911 phones, they also answer the front desk anytime someone walks in and there's something else I'm missing. But we'd have to look at our staffing if we really wanted this to be a function similar to passport services. But we can definitely look at that.
Okay, so wrong department, but just an idea because I was just at a meeting yesterday and people are really struggling in Scouts to get this done. And I didn't know that we had it here.
Yeah.
You know, it's at PCC, but then it's not. It's at a office somewhere in Alhambra, but it's not. Thank you.
Actually, I've used the live scan service myself 20 some years ago. At our department, yeah.
You just have to do it once.
yeah.
It comes
Yeah,
with
we
anyway.
had to do it. Oh, maybe I didn't do that with Scouts.
Yeah, I think it's Scouts. Okay, thank you. But we're off this segue. I will talk to the chief. Thank you.
Okay, next slide. The second of our three divisions is our recreation division. And the expense budget being proposed is 1.7 million, with personnel making up 990,000 and services supplies at 702,000. There is a personnel decrease here, and again, that is directly related to the PERS payment being moved to non-departmental account. And then you'll note that the FTE is decreasing by 0.61, which I spoke to a little bit earlier, related to our part-time personnel that support programming. In our services and supplies area, there is an increase of 40,000, and you see the additions there as well as the reduction. We have credit card fees that have increased largely due to our online registration and program registrations increasing, people enjoying that online registration as well as utilizing credit card payments.
Can that be covered by the cost or whatever, the charge? I mean,
Pass on the costs.
the,
We currently do not.
We should.
We will look at that as part of our cost of service study. We are losing tens of thousands of dollars across the entire operation. And this is one that we look at, yes, absolutely different. We collect the credit card fees at different places, but not at other places. And so we'll look at that holistically as part of the cost of service study, because that is that's something that we're paying for as a convenience to that customer. It is.
I mean, it's an actual cost. Why do we have to wait?
So we wouldn't have to wait, but it is, the fees are set on your fee schedule. So we'd have to bring an adjustment to the fee schedule to,
Study it.
well, to include, allow the city staff to charge it.
no.
Unfortunately or fortunately not.
I found out when I was mayor.
We have moving on, we have the second item listed there as transportation services have increased and then by 6,000. And as you know, we do field trips for camps, senior programs use our transportation and bus services. And then we do use some Prop A money to have to cover those expenses, but there has been an increase.
Right, so I was just gonna want to follow up on this. So if we have Prop A money that's for buses and we rent buses, wouldn't it be 100% covered? Just like why are we paying for live scan, or why is our budget increasing to do live scan if our police department does live scan?
Well, I'll address the
if we're
live
gonna-
scan. That is the live scan activity is a new expense this year that will be charged to our department.
And then is it reflected as income to our police department?
I will.
You know what I'm saying?
Right, I will step in
We
and
shouldn't
clarify
be
this.
charging
So-
ourselves for a service that our city
Right.
does.
So
I mean,
there are fees that we have to pay to provide those live scan services because they go out to the DOJ, the FBI, and to make sure, so to pay and actually operate that there is a cost per customer. The reason why we are booking a $3,000 expense to related to this is because as a philosophy, we believe that these individuals that are volunteering for us, we didn't want to straddle them with costs if they're volunteering their time. And so
Right, I'm not focused on that.
that
I'm
is
just
what it is.
focused
So-
on we should have income elsewhere, even though the program costs.
So there is no income is that the live scan is a loss because we're giving away the service. There is a cost to us because we have to pay the fees for the live scan services, but we're then giving those $3,000 worth away to our volunteers. We could take revenue from the volunteers. We could say
Okay,
that,
I
yeah.
understand. Well, I don't want the volunteers, I'm just saying. Okay, whatever.
Oh, I thought he was headed up here to explain. So I think the city does get charged for the live scan.
Right, we just heard that, yeah.
Right, okay. And then the transportation expenses have increased, and I may have to defer to Mark to ask if is there a charge in and out of the operating account for the Prop A money for the transportation? For,
Prop A.
yeah,
We are charging Prop A.
so it does not get charged to recreation.
It does not get charged. It does not get charged to the general fund.
Okay.
It's Recreations Department's but expenditure, however, is not coming out of general fund money. It's coming out of Prop A money. If that makes sense.
But then it
Yeah.
shouldn't be reflected in in this departmental budget. This again,
So if you follow in our on one of the sheets here in our department budget for this, where I'll clarify is that it is an expense to this budget, to this department. However, it is being paid for by a restricted fund. So whereas Ms. Johnson's department is responsible for this expenditure, it is showed as an expenditure out of her department. However, the revenue for it and where we are charging that cost is being pulled out of Prop A money. So we're coding it to a different account. We have a different account for it in the tie-out sheet, but it is a true cost spent by her department. Does that clarify this a little bit?
Yeah, but do we have an increase on the Prop A fund too? Is there an increase? And also with the bus service, they recover from the cost? I mean, the cost should be recovered, right? I mean, you can charge like, for example, the seniors that you take them. So the revenues will also be increased.
I don't know that I could answer that completely honestly, that all transportation fees for the senior programs, because they are subsidized. Okay, so I don't know that all of the transportation costs that as they increase get passed through and that our program fees get, increased, but that cost of service study will allow us to take that level of analysis on cost recovery.
All right. Any other questions? No? Okay. Please proceed. Thank you.
And then our last and final slide here is our third division, the library division, with a request for an expenditure budget of 1.7 million. Of that, personnel is 1.3, supplies 385,000. In the personnel area, that decrease again is due to the PERS payment being moved out. There's no FTE change at all. And in our services and supplies area, there is a reduction for 35,000, 40,000 of which was a one-time expense that we had budgeted for this year. And it was for the software upgrade paid for by the San Marino Public Library Foundation. And then there's an increase in our utilities. So that makes up that offset. And I am here to answer any further questions.
Any questions?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Mine is a big picture. It's not so much on the detail, and I appreciate the level of detail that's here. Mostly it has to do with the the big picture, I guess, is the usage of the San Marino Center. And I'm wondering where I see in here what amount of use fees or rental fees we're seeing. Is that a broken out line item that's reflected? Because stepping back even farther, I've only heard from groups that it's too expensive and it's too difficult to use. So our community members long-term groups in town aren't going there, which I was hoping would happen when we have this beautiful community center ready for them. And we incurred a lot of costs getting there, buying it, renovating it, and even increasing our employees to manage it. And I think everybody's doing an outstanding job. And I give props to, staff every time that I'm there, that it looks the way it does, and everything that's been held there has been wonderful. However, I was just at a meeting yesterday and they can't afford to use it, Girl Scouts. And they don't have any way to justify. They are volunteers. They don't charge for things like an award ceremony, but it's something that's done annually, just like the Boy Scouts have Eagle, they have Gold Awards. It's coming up in May. Can't use it. And no effort to work with them in terms of budget or ease of use. So those type of groups, and I think of Rotary, City Club, other groups that meet in town, are just not using the facility. So where do I see who is using the facility and the amount of use that we're getting, especially if we're paying more for utilities to light it up and it's underutilized as far as I can see for the community groups that I'm aware of. So this is a concern of mine, big picture, if we have a large budget and I don't see rental fees at all here reflected. And I think that's something that when we went down that road, we wanted to see the use. And I know that you've done programming. Some of it, I do think if we can't get the the people who used to do bridge, then we just need to get new bridge people or mahjong people, or we need to now think of getting people in there for daytime use of our own, but also those community groups in there. And it's not going to help us either way. If it just sits empty, we're not generating any funds.
Right. So I think I understand your question. And your big picture, curiosity around the revenue that we're generating. And this particular presentation today was focused on our operating budgets, not the revenue budget. Okay. And so, but what I can tell you from, actual use of the facility is it is absolutely picking up, and we do have several nonprofits then and community groups that are using the facility. This particular operating budget does not go into detail on the revenue detail around the 1.3 million or 1.1 million on the recreation side, which is where we collect those rental fees. So we can certainly bring that back, but it was not part of the scope of the operating budget, which is really focused on revenue, or excuse me, not focused on revenue, but focused on the expense to operate the facility.
Right. So where would I see revenue? I don't even know where I'm supposed to look for this. What is the line where it would be captured? I don't really, I've read this back and forth. And
the way we,
and I don't know. It's not.
Yeah, I will defer to city manager and finance director. The way we budget here is our costs for service, fees for service are up in the city manager's office and finance. They manage all of the revenues for the city at large. So it is commingled in the charges for service. And there is some detail, I believe, on attachment 12, which is, hold on a second.
As Director Johnson goes through that, Director Shea is going to add a little bit of color to the revenue section.
I do know that attachment 12 of your packet starts on page 153, and it's the schedule of revenues by fund. Okay. So within that, CSD's fees are commingled all within, starting on page 154 under charges for service. So you see a variety of all of our program revenues.
Hold on for me. I'm just trying to.
Middle of page 154.
Like contract class, non-resident fee, class refund fee.
Yep. Yep. Right
Admin
there.
fee, aquatics program. So
Yep.
in this.
Then we keep going.
Charges for services.
Yeah. And then you move over to, I will narrow in on rental fees, which those are captured on page
155.
155, middle of the page, use of money and property. Do you see that starting on 101, Fund 70?
I'm sorry, I do not. So
So-
this is a hunt and peck game. Yes,
Yeah,
I see it now.
sorry, I know it's a little.
Okay.
small.
So I'm seeing it as,
Yeah, so that's where you're gonna cap where the revenue is documented is all within there. So now,
as parks.
well, there's,
Oh, the line up from there. So 101-40?
No, if
No?
you look at 10170 3502 001 rents and concessions.
001. I
San
see it.
Marino Center. So current year we budgeted 270. We're roughly going to end up with 25,000 for the year. And then we lowered the estimate for the next year to 75. And that's the San Marino Center.
Right, and we don't go back far enough to see what it was. Well, 750, who knows what it was that year. Okay, so we're at 1/4 of what we,
yeah, and so let
What we
me
estimated.
pull my notes. We do have some justification and rationale for that. Let me just move to.
Well, I do recall while you're looking for that, that we said when we set the fees that we would assess after a year and make whatever adjustments necessary in order to capture the most use possible. So we're not quite at a year, but that's what I recall. If someone recalls something different, you're wrong. But no, I'm just kidding.
No, I think that's one consideration.
Right.
But if I could, I'll back up a little bit to answer your question about the revenues this year. And we did probably budget a little more optimistically, but there were also some unforeseen circumstances that impacted our ability to really even open up the facility on time. That was one thing. When we set that 270 last year, that was under several different assumptions that the building was going to open in July and it didn't open till the end of September. Then we had a little delay in trying to get those fees set during the month of October. And then we had actually budgeted for a few community groups that we had hoped and we were optimistic that they would join us as anchor clubs into our facility, one being the City Club. Well, we all know the City Club took a hiatus, so that impacted our projections. We also had hoped that Rotary Club would come over and choose our facility as their anchor facility, and that did not transpire either. So we have several different things that, the reason why we didn't hit our optimistic mark. Moving forward, we have lowered that. But I can tell you that revenues are picking up, bookings are picking up. Another window of opportunity that we lost last year because we opened later were when private rentals looking for that were those larger rentals for Friday, Saturday, and Sunday for wedding receptions, those things. We were a little late to the party as those people those individuals typically book 12 months in advance. So while we're in dialogue with those people right now that are very interested in using our facility. And so I can tell you we have several prospects. We are booking more and more every day. My report to city manager is weekend rentals are coming through really fast and furious. If not every weekend, we have a private party in there. So while this budget doesn't reflect it, we really believe we're going to have, a much more well-utilized facility. And I do want to remind the council that 60% of the usage of that facility is for programming, not rentals. 40% of the opened operating hours is set aside for facility rental use, not programming. So programming is still a very important part, and our programs are program participation, and the demand is really strong for programming as we balance a schedule to operate that facility.
Yes, Councilmember, please.
So, we talk about that, so that's the usage.
Mhm.
Usage besides the rent.
Mhm.
But as for usages, what's the percentile, the meeting the target or the forecast? Do you have a general, like usage wise, the time being used? For the
Number of
facility?
hours
Number of
of
hours,
the
yes.
operating hours. I do
Right.
not have that at my fingertips, but we do have a pro forma that I could easily, get back to council. We do have that broken down in a complete, forecasted plan.
And following Vice Mayor's comments questions earlier about the ease of use, because I do get questions too, also comments about when they try to use it, especially for smaller nonprofit groups in our town, sometimes they don't have the insurance to cover themselves, and they're being asked for, a lot of, tedious procedures or proofs of certain insurances in order to cover them for using the facility themselves. That kind of deter them or that's not not helping the nonprofits in town, especially when they're smaller or not a constant meeting, especially just one time, two times. It's very hard for them to just go purchase, spending a lot of money and just have something to cover them, to use. Is there certain way that we can have allow with certain type of procedures to help, that we can further attract, or help nonprofits, especially smaller and not regular meetings?
I'm going to defer to our city manager.
The reason, thank you, Councilmember Lowe. The reason why I'm going to answer this as opposed to Director Johnson is that this is, the insurance question relates to a bigger picture of the city's operations and our bigger liabilities as a whole. The community center and the community services department have several options for community groups to purchase insurance through us for very reasonable fees. I think they start at like $70 or $80, depending on the size of the group, depending on whether you serve alcohol or not. They're fairly reasonable for insurance for an event. That could be a large party that could have several hundred people. They're low-cost insurances. Why the bigger question, which I think you're asking, relates to why do we have those requirements? As Director Guerrero talked about in her slide on the human resources and in our non-departmental, where we have our liability insurance rates going up incredibly by 26% liability insurance. Absent the implementation of these insurance requirements for our end users, we would then have issues with our own insurer. And our own insurer would then turn around and reassess and say, well, if you are not accommodating for that liability and covering yourself in that liability, we will charge the city more for insurance. So what we are trying to do by the use of the center for an individual group is a benefit for that group or the service that they're providing the community. But the philosophy generally of the council has been that if that group is using that, then they should not burden the rest of the organization with additional liability insurance costs. And so we're passing that through to the end user. It is expensive to a certain degree, but the flip side of it is that if we had to bear that cost, you're seeing that from our insurers be passed on to us elsewhere in the organization by hundreds of thousands of dollars. So we recognize that it's difficult sometimes. It's an added cost for our nonprofits and our community groups and these folks that are trying to provide a service. But the trade-off is that the city as a whole, our residents, our taxpayers, everybody else are paying for it twofold. You're also paying because our insurance rates are going up by so much.
I'd like to also add, that staff's been incredible over there. We did an event. I think it's the first time is difficult, but there are ways where if it's a reoccurring local organization, we can provide insurance and you don't have to do it every single time, right? You essentially can have that coverage. They helped me do that on behalf of Rotary. So I think, again, first time's a little more difficult, but going forward, it'll be easier.
We have also created a cheat sheet, if you will, to kind of break it down in a 4-step process. We have tried to really educate anybody that comes in. Our rental consultant supervisor, Victoria Marshall, she's done a phenomenal job and we hear nothing but really great feedback. So as we educate our potential customers, it is becoming you know, the ease of use becomes greater. And then word of mouth has been, you know, nothing but, you know, really phenomenal. And anybody that we do have in has a good experience in terms of, you know, the quality of the facility, the AV, the staff, all that kind of stuff. And then word of mouth is really going to be our best advertising. So.
And
Right, but I think there's still the word of mouth that it's too expensive and
Well,
people,
and as
groups can't afford it. They don't charge their members. And now we're looking at City Club, what will the membership fee have to be raised to in order to accommodate meetings at the community center? And will people drop out of City Club membership if the cost goes too high? So again, I don't think it's a success in that regard. And I think we talked about revisiting the fee structure back in October when we went round and round and we were gonna reduce it and then we didn't. And so we were gonna look at it now. And now is the time to do that because I'm not hearing success about a easy way to rent it. And I'm not hearing success, not about the insurance issue. I'm not even saying about that. It's about the fees and the hours and the AV setup and the breakdown and the list is a lot for a group that's using it for a one-off thing once or twice a year. It's a lot. It's very expensive. And I don't see any negotiations or some assistance for community groups that aren't professionals. And it's not the events on the weekend and the weddings or whatever, where you have a wedding planner and professionals to deal with our professionals. This is bought by community members and residents. Renovation is paid for by them and they're not using it. And I'm not seeing it being used by these groups, nor do I think that they're able to book it for next year as they're planning their calendars because they still can't afford it. And they're put off by the fact that it's so difficult. PTAs, scouts, all those groups that benefit and used to meet there regularly are not going. If they went once and they're like, whew, did that. That was tough. Now we're finding elsewhere. Demands for the schools have picked up. Great, good money for our schools, but why are we getting people who are using school facilities after hours that used to use our community center? We have to be realistic about what a community center says. Community center. Our community bought, paid for, and is still paying for all of this. So I don't know, we need to have that discussion sooner rather than later as people are planning the next year calendars, because I'm well aware of board members in all those groups who cannot see a way to have meetings there, and they used to.
Thank
And
you.
that's sad.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. We'll certainly keep this in our work program and bring it back as part of the cost of service study. And once the community center's been opened, we
That's
will.
going to be too late. When is our cost of study going to be? Okay, you have always disagreed.
You know,
with
though,
me.
you just
I'm
admit it,
sorry.
you've never wanted this,
Order.
and that's the problem.
All right.
We've
want
been
people
told
to
we will
use it.
study it. We've been told that it's going to
$18
become a
million
service.
later.
See,
and
that's not
people,
the issue.
scouts
The issue
can't
was
have their
revenues just a
ceremony
second.
All right, budget.
We're on budget.
Budget.
Let's just stay on budget.
Anything
All right.
else?
We'll move on to the next. Thank you, Ms. Johnson. We're going to move on.
Thank
We
you.
have two departments left. Our
We need
fire.
a break.
Oh, okay. All right, yes, let's take a 10 minutes break.
10 minutes. Back at 5 after.
You please. Next, please. Hello, Chief. Good morning. Still good morning.
Morning, Mayor. Good morning, Council. Again, Fire Department is presenting basically a status quo budget. There are a few references to increases here that are really the result of cost of living and right sizing at least our recruitment budget. But I think the real issue for the Fire Department has been our overtime. And those have been primarily the result of injuries that resulted on duty and vacancies that we had in the fire department. I know I've addressed the council before on number of people that we've had leave. The council generously increased pension benefits, which has allowed us to completely fill our ranks at this point. We still have 3 long-term injuries that are nagging at us, but we are dealing with an aging workforce, unfortunately. And as Lizette mentioned, the injuries that we're managing are not those that occurred yesterday. They're chronic, long-term injuries that our employees finally taken time off, extensive time off to have surgeries and other corrective measures. And about 15% of our injuries were COVID-related infections. Those are considered on-duty injuries, and those were the result of our firefighters treating residents and then contracted the disease. So unfortunately, we are managing that. And I think as the city manager mentioned, we're increasing training. We do have a specific trainer to reduce work comp injuries. We're actively working with human resources and our third-party administrator to get people back to work. And firefighters are well aware this is an issue. And, we're actively pursuing solutions and trying to manage this. And that concludes my presentation.
Questions? Vice Mayor, no, seeing none. Thank you, Chief. That was the fastest, fire department presentation.
Thank you,
I've
Mayor,
seen.
because of your leadership.
Thank you. I know it's better than last year.
He's referring to the.
So many questions.
Yeah, he may have been referring to the new city manager instead of. We'll go. We'll followed by. Chief Encontra is going to round us out. He is the last slide for this morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Chief.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, City Council. I can be faster. You've heard most of my presentation already. One of the things, just based upon the earlier conversation of the council, we are definitely going to be looking at the possibility of covering the cost of the radio upgrades. That is primarily maintenance and service, not an equipment related cost, which we're using the COPS grant to purchase the equipment. The recruitment, that's a big increase that you'll see in the budget of about $10,000. It is very difficult to recruit, as everyone is aware. The costs associated with recruitment is very expensive, background investigations, et cetera, things like that. CAD RMS is going to increase to $100,000. That traditionally, as I had indicated, was covered by our COPS funding. And then the last item on there, autism certification and self-defense training equipment. That expense is being covered through donations from our community. I recently saw an article about Modesto PD where all of their members were provided certification in training, identification, and understanding on how to work with those individuals with autism. And just my understanding of this community, other communities, it's an important thing to have, and our officers will be certified through a specialized program that it's recognized. It's not something just off the shelf. It's a recognized organization. And then the self-defense training equipment is not only for our own officers. And one thing that we're using this equipment for and reducing the training expense is by having our cadre certified as trainers And we're able to do the training here on site rather than the cost of sending an officer for a day or two away from here and being trained by someone else. So we'll be incurring some savings from that. Exact the amount I don't know because we haven't done it yet. And then also we've had an increase in requests by the community to re-engage with them in our self-defense programs. And that's one of the reasons we have the training equipment. Additionally, there is an issue on overtime. And we're definitely looking at that. We're working with HR and Ms. Guerrero on monitoring those officers or employees who are injured on duty status and what we can do to make sure that we can expedite their return. We're also looking at our overtime is incurred through extended watch that complete investigations. It is through court subpoenas. Those things are difficult to decrease because of the needs to do that. We also have the ability of engaging the community, and also a lot of our expense and overtime does come to school events. So that's where some of our incurrence of that is. One of the things I'm very happy is we have hired our management analyst, Cheryl Barada. Cheryl comes back to us with a significant experience in Los Angeles Police Department. And since both of us were there, that department has a culture where we want to monitor overtime. And that will be one of her projects, is to work on how we can reduce overtime and monitor it. Also, you'll be seeing something in a council meeting about a scheduling software that will help us monitor, and then working with finance to really understand where we spend and what we can do to reduce. That's my report. And if anyone has any questions.
Question? Okay, Vice Mayor. Well, I'm sorry. All right, go ahead. Councilmember Toll, please.
What is OTS Grant Fund and why aren't we getting any revenues from them now?
We have had 2 years of the Office of Traffic Safety grant. We had 2 grants in last fiscal year, 2 grants in this current fiscal year. We did not reapply at this time. One of the grants that is being offered is for a vehicle. However, that vehicle, whether it be a police sedan or a police motorcycle, must only be used for driving under the influence, arrests and enforcement.
I'm glad you said arrest in there. I was a little worried.
And that is not practical for us because the number of those types of incidents are low, and we would actually be wasting money, or we'd be wasting an officer's time.
Another question. When we were talking about the COPS fund earlier, you said that there are several items in your budget where COPS funds were going to be used or not
Yes.
going to be used. However, I just must tell you that you say COPS fund $100,000 is proposed, and yet the CADRMS is 100,000. So that seems like a wash for me, but there are other.
Yes.
Okay. Which
We
others?
will be using, like I said, for the expense, there's about a $9,200 expense for radio upgrades and maintenance. We're going to see if that expense, there's programming that has to be done when we talk about upgrading. And so that's one of the items. We are looking at a breaching door as part of a training piece of training equipment for both law enforcement and for the fire service on how to make entry into a door. It's reusable and we can continue to use that. And that's important. And if we have to gain entry into a home.
But that would probably be under the capital budget.
No, it's $2,500.
Okay.
So it's less. There's also the account of, $29,000 for the CAD. And we're going to look at the idea of some of our training expenses. And if that can be covered by the COPS grant.
So in May, when you come back, we anticipate that the COPS fund expenditure will be increased.
If we are able to use it for that purpose, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because right now it appears to me, based upon everything you said, the only thing that it's being used for would be the $100,000 other contracts or services, CAD, RMS.
Well, we have to also remember that in our capital equipment, that we have asked that the body worn cameras, that expense be used by cops.
Oh, okay. Okay, I was just trying to figure that out, and I appreciate that. Thank you, John.
Those, no, they are current expenses.
Current.
And we will shift the funding source from the general fund to the COPS fund if permissible.
Question? Yes.
It's not about the operating budget, it's more about traffic safety, since you mentioned about traffic safety funds earlier. I saw that year to date.
Microphone.
Oh. Nicole. We'll have that new system. I'll have a body worn camera, body worn speaker later. I'll just need to remember to turn it off when I go to use the
Yes.
So, on the traffic collisions for year to date comparing to last year, it's scary, like increase on the numbers from 61.
Thank you.
So traffic collisions has climbed year to date, same year comparing to last year. At least the number here shows 1,291 to now 239. That's that's citation, I mean, but are those, like anything related to what I mean is like cell phone uses, or because what I worry was a lot of collisions being on traffic commission before public safety. I know a lot of collisions was caused by use of cell phones, and then the reason why I ask, like I had my own experience, I have lost 2 cars totaled because of someone using cell phone while driving. One is my daughter. She was driving. Well, no. Someone used it.
True confessions.
No. It's someone using a cell phone hit my daughter when she was driving and totaled it. And my own, that's in Pasadena, and my own, I was driving in Arcadia, and someone was using their cell phone, just drive through the traffic and hitting me, both by that. So, and I remember there's a lot of incidents related to cell phone use back then, at least a few years ago, when we every month we heard the numbers, and I always like, wow, again, somebody's using cell phone. So, and the reason why I brought this up, I just recently got a citation in San Gabriel myself by holding a cell phone. So then that was on my birthday. So there's a lot of texts coming in. Happy birthday. So I was just leaving a parking lot, and I just look at it, and the police somehow behind me and say, "So you're using cell phone." At first I wanted to debate because I'm not talking. I just quick look and put it down, but I got caught. And then later, of course, I was talking to a police officer, also let him know that I'm a council member. This is a good thing. And he wanted to waive that ticket for me because of that. I told him, no, give me that ticket. I'll frame it on my birthday. I have that ticket. And because it's relatively a cheaper ticket anyway. So, but that, I think, I don't know if how our cities, doing that on citations, because I look at number, there's a lot of citation. I don't know if you have any numbers regarding to that, but I do think that using a cell phone still is a big part, at least from before, for a lot of, leads to a lot of traffic collisions and other things. So do we have a program where our police officer out there actually, enforcing if someone's holding or using a cell phone? PTA.
Out of that 2,000 number? Wow, not very many.
We we had an Office of Traffic Safety grant that we're currently in, and we have run a couple of overtime details paid by the grant for traffic enforcement. We do that. It's not just a cell phone, it's distracted driving, whether you're eating, putting on makeup, using your phone, or you have your dog in your lap. All those things are distracted driving. But we do enforce it when we do have a traffic collision investigation. We do, as part of the investigation, do ask if there was anyone who saw someone on the phone, one of the parties, or if we ask the party itself if they were using their phone at the time. But we can take a look and see if there was anything, but off the top of my head, I don't know the numbers, but we do always check for that and do enforce that.
For this number, I assume there's a bigger revenue, since we're giving more citations.
The revenue that we get from traffic citations for these type of things, the revenue is insignificant that comes to the city. The revenue goes a lot of different places, and we just get a couple of pennies.
And the other thing is, another question is, again, ease of use. When people get their citations, is mailing in a check the only way? Because I could actually pay online. So
yes,
our residents can pay online, or people can actually pay.
The information on how to handle a citation is on the back of the citation. You also get additional information. You can contact the court. You can appear, and I believe for some violations, you can do things online by pleading guilty. It's fairly simple to go.
On our own city website.
No, it's through the Los Angeles Department or County Courts.
Some city has their own.
The county courts for traffic. The county handles traffic violation complaints.
Thank you.
I had a quick question for you, and it was along the similar lines about traffic collisions. I've been informed that I think we've had a couple of people who have been hit and badly injured here, and I think this might involve Chief Rueda as well. And so they were transported alive still to various hospitals for emergency care, but they passed away when they're at the hospital. I'm thinking about traffic collisions that happened in the early morning hours where some people were crossing the street and were hit by a hit and run. And so I was concerned about that. I don't know how it's reflected in our records, or if it is because they pass away later because they're not able to survive these. And I know it's happened at least twice over the past year to workers or people who were coming to help people in their homes, perhaps, but were killed on our streets. And so I'm wondering, do we track those in some way? And it's a speeding, it's early morning driving, people are commuting. I think one was on Los Robles, or perhaps that right above that intersection, and I'm not aware of the other one, although I know the circumstances. And I'm wondering, are we keeping track, and do we have traffic enforcement that starts early morning to slow people down? I'm so glad to see the citations, but I'm just thinking we do have some tragedies that happened here in town on why it wasn't a death on our streets. It caused the death of people.
To correct the information you have, we've had one traffic collision, which was at Winston and Robles, that resulted in the death of an individual. That investigation is ongoing. We do keep a record. There is a statistical account that, yes, we had a fatality. The second one that you're talking about on Los Robles, the woman survived. That is an active investigation. We have put out information, requesting additional information from the community on both of those collisions. So we do obviously keep track of that. Unfortunately, for both of these, the evidence that we've received is minimal. We've worked with outside agencies. We've asked the CHP, we've asked the Sheriff's Department to assist us. And they all concur everything we're doing is correct, and we've done everything we can. The death of the individual on Winston may not have been a vehicle or a car. It could have been a bicycle, or it could have been a fall, because there is no evidence that specifically shows that there was any kind of vehicle involved. We just don't have that information, but we are looking. We've been out there. We've repeatedly gone out there and canvassed the area. We've gone out and stopped people in the area at the same time. So it's an ongoing investigation. We do track all that information.
Maybe a stroke or a cardiac arrest? It was early in the morning, right?
Yes, but the coroner said there was he died from the fall.
I just wanted to follow up because I do think that that's.
Yes, no, that's
And I spoke, and you guys have been out there, and I know residents in that area said they can contact us. I totally, it's not a reflection, I'm just wondering what else we can do, because that's really scary for residents to, their friends and family.
thank you. And if you have a live scan question, I've got that information.
Yeah, nice photo. Where was it taken? Huntington Library?
Yeah.
A nice photo.
Yes,
Yeah.
it was.
Was it the whole department?
Yes, it was. It's a little over a year ago.
Oh, so, and then who was on call then? I'm just kidding.
Actually, we had I think San Gabriel covering for us at that time.
Oh, man, no. All right. Any other question? Seeing none. Thank you, Chief.
Welcome. Thank you.
Mayor, so this concludes, Mayor and council members, this concludes our departmental budget presentations. Now, what I'd like to do, again, without too much of the niceties, I want to thank the council and all of our staff for the work that we just went through. I'm going to run, actually, Mr. Baumann, can you take me back to slide 15, please? The roadmap slide. Thank you. So we have one real outstanding question that we need direction on from the council today. What we did here, and I'm going to go through a couple of the things, what we did hear from the council and what we will do over the course of the next few weeks is continue to go through departmental budgets, continue to look for savings, and see where we can trim additional things other than what the council directed us to trim at the beginning of the meeting. On our May 31st council meeting in 1 month from today, we will have the budget back before the city council for adoption. That presentation that Friday morning will be an abridged version of what you saw today, where we will highlight changes from today, anything that we were able to save, any moves up and down, things like that. It'll be a much shorter presentation on the budget, hopefully just with the adoption. That Friday morning on May 31st, we will have several other items before the council that relate and round out the bigger picture of our budget as it relates to labor agreements with our associations, consideration of the public safety parcel tax, and things like that. The one other item that we heard from council during Chief and Contra's presentation was related to the COPS funds. The question came up about whether there would be the use of COPS funds and going back to see where those COPS funds could be used to offset the general fund impact. And so unless I'm hearing otherwise from the council, the direction that staff has is that to the extent possible on COPS monies, we will use COPS monies to offset the impact on the general fund. I'm seating no opposition. Perfect. So the next item, the last open question that we have relates to the first bullet point on this slide, and it relates to the Prop A monies. We had some conversation at the beginning of this meeting, and again, as Councilmember Talt pointed out, we have to find how to fill that hole for this year before we embark on the more structural process of making sure that we have enough year over year. And this today is step one. This was a difficult meeting because we had to do this at some point, and we ripped the Band-Aid off today. We daylit the problems and we daylit some of the solutions, and now we will embark on some of that. The first step here, or the next step, would be this conversation about Prop A money. If you'd like, the council's direction today would be very helpful in whether you would like us to bring the sale of the Prop A money as part of the May 31st budget, or the other option is and I will say this is a combination, right? So we are going to look to see what other cuts we can make to drive down the need to sell Prop A monies and drive down the need for the use of the COPS monies. And then in combination with that, would we like to sell the Prop A monies, or would we like to fill that difference with the unassigned general fund balance? So you have two questions. The question here is, we can use the totality of this 850 or whatever the difference is from the Prop A monies, or we can dip into our one-time unassigned fund balance, which again, for the council, this is what you've been putting that money away for, is for instances exactly like this, so that you can address this. It is your true rainy day fund. It's not raining today. It is really misting. It's sprinkling in the context of this, but you have a choice. You can use the Prop A money, or you can use your unassigned balance. And that's what we'd like direction on, so that we can present all of that on May 31st.
And I ask one question. how much of the Prop A fund do we have to use or we lose? You know, some of the money expires. We can use that first, but to make this decision, I also want to know where we are on that.
Absolutely. Mr.
equation. Thank you.
Siegfried.
So the way it works is we get the money and then it's kind of like a first in, first out. So you just assume like you got it and you spend it first. So based on my calculations, for next fiscal year, what we have budgeted as you've seen it, we are budgeting $300,000 to spend, but we need to spend 302,000. Like, so we're pretty much on. That's if we spend everything, based on the parking lots, recreation trips, dial ride, everything like that. Everything to. So, but as of now, $2,000 would have to go back. And there's nothing about, and then. But moving forward, because we got some leniency because of COVID, they knew we didn't have bus trips, things like that. So they kind of said, okay, we'll give you guys a cushion. Fiscal year 25, 26, if we spend at the current rate, we would have to, we would lose $160,000 going back right to them. And then in 26, 27, again, spending at the same rate, we would need to spend $1 million. And I forecast 216,000. So that's $800,000 a check we have to write back to Metro, right back to them. So we have a little bit of time, but it starts accumulating. If you don't spend what you budget, you start kind of funneling down. So, and we can get a little bit of reprieve because of the parking lot alley project. We put a reserve in saying, hey, we're going to spend $350,000. And they understand it's a larger project, they give you a 5-year window to spend it. So we've gotten a little bit of a grace period. That's why it kind of like doesn't really impact us till 26, 27. But however, if we don't spend that, that money goes back too. So we have a little bit of time, but it's one of those things we need because I spoke to a neighboring city about this, and they were definitely on board. And they were going to start working with their finance department and maybe see what they need to get done. I want to say about a year or two ago, the Director Chung and I spoke with the City of Commerce. They send the same thing, 75 cents on the dollar. That's the going rate. And I've researched this with Beverly Hills, and a lot of other cities have done this. But at that time, we didn't have a lot of money accumulated, and they kind of were like, well, how about like 200,000? And they were saying, well, they wanted like 500. So, but it is starting to like snowball on us. So that's why it'd be nice to kind of make a decision so we can kind of program some stuff. And I know we talked about trying to find other projects, which I will pull up my notes. But again, we are kind of limited to just Huntington, really, and kind of on that bus line within that area. So that's kind of where we are.
I mean, I can go first on this. I think, I've talked a lot with Director Chung previously about this. I think we're kind of at a point where there really isn't a way to spend this money, even if we keep accruing it. So my personal opinion is, yeah, we probably try to sell this off at this point in time if we don't see, and we have ongoing money coming in for the expenses we really need to cover. And we've shown year after year between Dial-A-Ride and the schools and pretty much baseline what we're spending. So my opinion is, yeah, we sell it off.
Councilmember Tolt,
I concur.
Councilmember Lowe, Vice Mayor, I'm sorry.
No, I don't disagree. I think this is money. We should not sell at a discounted rate. Particularly because it looks like we'll be okay this coming year and we have to deal with it next year. That would give Director Shaw and her team a chance to look at it and work with Mr. Siegfried and see if we can up our regular 300,000 or whatever we're spending, among associated costs on some additional use. And then I would like to bring this up next year. It seems wiser to me to hold off until we're really sure. And then we can also make a better deal if people still want the money. I mean, or the same deal anyway, but have more to offer them of the 75 cents on a dollar. So I would wait at least for 1 year and have us do a little bit more creative.
I think we should cut the budget as much as we can because next year the same problem is going to happen again. And where are we going to get that $1 million? Are we going to have that every year? So, but then you got 3 here already. So
Mayor, what I heard you alluding to there is that we have 3 votes to sell it. And so we have the direction. Staff will take direction to sell this money and program this money as part of our budget that we bring back before you to sell as much as we can, as much as little as we can as well, to fill the hole that we have. We will make the cuts. There's several things. I'm going to go over what the direction that we're receiving. So we will sell it, bring a report, work with our neighboring city to try and sell it. We will cut as much as we can to minimize the impact on what we need to sell. And we will then work and program as much COPS funding as we need to do into this to offset the general fund impact. And fourth, we will begin to embark on some of the things that are behind me, as you've already instructed staff to do, whether it's the cost of service study, whether it's addressing overtime, the renewal of the public safety parcel tax and other things here. This holistic approach is the beginning. It is the start of our realignment. It is the start of us trying to steady and get our hands on the revenue issue, which is difficult for cities like us that are so reliant on property taxes that aren't growing the same way that other revenue streams have. But we have direction that we need. If there's any other clarification, this will conclude our budget conversation until May 31st, where we bring back for adoption the budgets.
I actually have something to add. Since we're talking about this, we're talking about expense budget reoccurring, and I agree with almost everybody here. This property money may be a one-off situation. It's something that nobody. Maybe it's a little sensitive subject, but I mean, 4 or 5% of our overall budget here is cafeteria benefits. I think we need to take a look at least having a formulation for that besides cost plus, and that might help with the ongoing budget. Yeah, that's my personal opinion, because when I look at it aggregated, we're looking at 5% of our operating budget.
Microphone, please.
For the Prop 8 money, and just make sure it's, like it says, excess fund that we cannot use. Focus on those for anything we can use them, so we don't lose that.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I would like to open up this item for public comments. Does anyone here wish to speak at this time? If so, please state your name and address for the record. See none. Do we have any remotely?
Not.
All right, shall we move to consent calendar? Do any council members wish to pull any items from consent? As a reminder, council members may vote no on specific consent calendar items without pulling the item for discussion. Are there,
Yeah, I just have a question regarding the only matter on consent. And that is, does the resolution provide an unlimited approval? For example, if somebody came in with a $500,000 claim, if we give that away, pursuant to this resolution, it could be settled, or should we somehow cap the authority? Because I think that's what exists right now.
If I may. This is not approving a settlement. This is approving or allowing the city manager to support a determination when it comes to industrial disability retirement through CalPERS.
Okay, so there's no financial output.
No, and from what I understand.
Okay, I saw that in there, and then I was a little bit confused, but you've answered the question. Thank you.
You are very welcome.
Are there any requests for public comment with this item? Seeing none, anything remotely? No?
No, there's not.
Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second? Do I have a second?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Councilmember Cho,
Yes.
Councilmember Lowe,
Yes.
Councilmember Talt,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Shepherd Rami, Mayor Wong.
Yes. Do you have any written communication or public writings for distribution?
We do not.
Are there any items the council would like to add to a future agenda? Seeing none, do any council member have a special adjournment? Seeing none, okay, I adjourn this meeting to the next Wednesday meeting. Closed session.